Hello and welcome to Net That Haul. It's the third episode of the 23-24 preseason. Today we're going to look at midfielder analysis and rankings. You can catch the defenders episode and the goalkeepers last week and our first impressions. But today we have a very special guest joining us. We have Mark McEdigan, FPL General as he's otherwise known. Welcome to Net That Haul.
Good to be here, lads. Thanks for the invite. This is, I think, a well overdue visit to Net That Haul. I've been tuning in and out last couple of seasons, so it's good to be on the same side as you for a change rather than listening in. So we're looking forward to this for the best part of a week now. So especially the midfielders, I've picked specifically midfielders because I think it's the most interesting area of the FPL team this season. So yeah, good to be here, and thanks again for the invite.
Fantastic. I'll end the poll now on YouTube. But essentially, we asked if people were going to go with a 5-man midfield to start the season, and 88% voted yes. So this is the best episode to have you here, Mark. I think it's going to be the most exciting. You've obviously given us a philosophy like Craig did last week. So I think we're going to ask all the guests for their philosophy, FPL philosophy, and also 5 lessons, or any amount of lessons really, learned from last season. So I think we're going to go straight into your philosophy. But before we do, I'm just going to bring in FPL Mariner and FPLLens, obviously, our co-host steering the ship tonight. But I want to ask each of you, and Mark himself, real quick. Obviously, he can't be a general on the ship. So what rank are we going to give him from the Navy? I would go with Admiral of the Fleet. I don't know. I think that's the top rank in the Royal Navy here. So what are you guys going for? You voting with me, or you got an alternative name?
It's a good question. I think Commodore.
Commodore is very nice. Gabe, are you going to pick between one of those two, or
deckhands don't get a vote?
Deckhand.
Everyone starts as a deckhand.
General a deckhand. That's you.
Yeah. Do I need to be a deckhand on my first appearance to kind of just help on board and work my way up?
I think we do it by ranks. I think that book.
Deckhand, the least amount of responsibility, the most amount of fun. So we'll get to the balance of responsibility and complexity and fun in just a moment.
Fantastic. Yeah. All right.
I'll take Commodore sounds fun. I'm
Commodore.
Commodore for one night only.
That's
watch somebody go snap up that Twitter handle before we're 100%.
Finished. The trouble is, people in the chat are already talking about seamen, which worries me deeply.
Those were the first 2 ranks when I started out as a NCO, non-commanding officer in the cadets and Navy. Yeah. So there's able seamen and leading seamen. So no one really wanted to be in the Navy in school growing up. But we go straight into the philosophy, 3-minute timestamp, more to remind myself than anything else. Thank you to the podcast listeners as well. Hope you enjoyed today's show with our special guests. I know the podcast listeners, I do advise they skip forward generally to a few minutes in once we're done with all the faffing about. But yeah, Mark, why don't you take us through your quote? It's from Gandhi himself.
Yeah, it's I can't say I'm someone who just rolls famous quotes off the top of my head. So I had to do an unashamed quick Google to find a quote that suited me as an FPL manager. And I liked when I seen Gandhi's name pop up because we get the usual, don't back the early kickoff quote from Gandhi, his most famous one. But I've gone for a different one. So yeah, to lose patience is to lose the battle. And that just resonated with me. And I think people always ask me, what kind of FPL manager are you? And the first word that always comes to mind is patient. I'm an extremely patient FPL manager. My wife would probably say I'm not patient in life, but I'm a very patient FPL manager. I think that's what's kind of helped me to be relatively successful, over the last, 5 to 10 years. I'm probably more patient than most managers. I think nowadays, the way the game has gone, it's, I think, one of the very few ways left to get an edge over, a lot of other managers is just to roll that transfer as often as you can. FPL managers are trigger happy, especially after a bad game week. They're quite keen to try and go in and fix things, and things might not necessarily be broken. So I am a very, very patient manager, not just with transfers, with players as well. I'll always maybe give players a bit more time than others would. Sometimes that's detrimental. You can obviously hold on a player for too long, and it's trying to hit that sweet spot. But patience. I wanted to get a quote in there with patience. And again, just a reminder for myself going into this season that being a patient manager has worked for me. last season reminded me of that again. Even when things weren't going well, I didn't panic. I stayed patient, and I feel like reading this quote, if I go away from my strategy even for a couple of game weeks, if I kind of try and force things, maybe the battle can be lost very quickly and you end up in a bigger hole. So yeah, I thought this was good for my style of play.
I love this, Gabe. What are your thoughts as our resident philosopher?
I mean, it's perfect for Mark, because when I started listening to Mark's shows years ago, and that's what I would always get from your shows, Mark, is just patience, because it's something. I mean, ask my mom. I don't have it. I don't play with it. It's what makes me a poor FPL manager. So you have your different influences and content creators, and Mark, you do epitomize patience in FPL, and there's always a lesson there. Like when that patience works out, I love that little reminder. It's like, oh yeah, I almost despaired, and you came through something, like an experience. So I think that's an important lesson that I'm gonna have to remind myself of this season.
I wish I had that patience. I have to say, I've just written down calm and patient. Then I've written underneath it, impulsive and irritable. That's me.
I was wondering what Chris's first thoughts would be. Yeah, because
no, I actually think it's very, very true. Because how many times? I mean, one thing I said, wasn't it, is you've got a bench for when we were doing my lessons learned from last season. Don't be frightened of taking that grey or even a red arrow one week, because you're probably going to be better off having that extra transfer for the weeks coming. It's not all about trying to get a green arrow every single week. Sometimes you've got to take stock, and maybe if you've got an injury, use your bench. That's what it's there for. But no, I didn't last year, and every time I did that, what happened? It backfired every single time. That's
a good point you made, Chris, about you can't strive for a green arrow every game week. Nobody gets a green arrow every game week. And I think something I've learned over the last, even more recent years, 3 or 4 seasons, is and I probably kind of picked it up from more experienced managers than me. I know I've been playing the game for a long time, but people I really respect and look up to was, you've got to some weeks just go into the game week and just accept that this is more than likely going to be red, but short-term pain for long-term game. If you can kind of look forward a couple of game weeks, there's always going to be weeks where your team, you will feel it looks weaker to the field, but just accept that and don't make a transfer just to try and force, to turn that red arrow gray or green, and just take it on the chin. And it's hard. You got to just try and keep think of the bigger picture. And sometimes it's like life. You take some short-term pain, and then hopefully being patient will pay off in the long run. A very simplistic example of that is the chips. New managers will come into the game and play all their chips in the first couple of game weeks, whereas the more experienced managers will just let those kind of marathon runners sprint ahead, and then we'll catch them and pass them out with the chips later in the season. So yeah, patience for me. It's probably one of the hardest things to be as an FPL manager, but certainly one of the most important.
I think I agree with Gav. I think it's absolutely spot on. I think it's something that I'm going to really strive to be. It's completely against me. We're going to come on to this FPL personality profiling in a minute. So this is going to be hilarious when we get to that point. But yeah, that's completely alien to me, patience. I'm very impatient. I expect everything to be done yesterday. And if it doesn't happen, then I get really frustrated really quickly. So it's something I've got to seriously temper in my FPL going forwards. But anyway, no, I love it.
Sorry, guys. Basically, I'm giving a few shout outs.
Probably a good idea, Nina.
I think as we go into your lessons learned, I think the patience one definitely feeds straight into them. So it's a nice segue as well, Mark. But what I'm doing to keep today's episode short and not to, fully put you in the doghouse with the missus by keeping you here too late is to just put the messages up on screen, guys. So I'll start the questions for the Q&A at the end. As always, we will get to any interesting questions. There are obviously some questions in the Discord, YouTube questions channel as well from the YouTube members. But I'm just going to put your messages up on the screen. We'll interact with you in the live chat. I think for everyone's sake, including the podcast listeners, this week and this week alone, Mark, I'm not going to go through for like 3-4 minutes and say hi to every single person that's message I've put up. But we will put your messages up. If they're relevant to the section we're discussing, we'll bring those up at the time so that it helps flow the conversation. But I think let's go into your tips for a successful season. You've got some nice ones here. And I think roller
Yeah.
transfer, as you say, is the first one, right? Which is leading back to what you just said about the philosophy. So I love how it shows you as a manager.
Yeah, I think most of these kind of lessons learned, they do link back to the patient philosophy, back to the main man Gandhi again. And again, I was just trying to, you were asking me about, link it back to last season. What did you learn from last season? But I think I've been playing this game for so long now that I tend not to learn too much these, with these more recent seasons, because I've been playing for so long. It's more just more of a reminder of what actually works for me, and just kind of reinforcing my style of play. So again, I think, with all these interrupted seasons over the last 3-4 years, it's been much harder to roll a transfer as often as possible. And I'm really looking forward to hopefully being able to do that a lot more this year, because again, it's just that, going back to that simple approach, an extra transfer over a lot of the field with another week of information as well really does put you in a really strong position. So if you can, especially, if it's a Friday deadline, or you're seeing a lot of people, there's a bandwagon takes off on a Friday and everyone's going for a Reece James or something like that. And if you can really stay strong, and if you don't really believe in the hype, it can be very hard. FOMO is definitely a big thing in FPL now with all the content out there. And as it gets closer to deadline, I just try to not even log in. Especially, if it's a Saturday morning deadline, I try not to log in at all, because I feel like that's when you can go against your patient approach and you'll make transfers that you didn't intend to. And the FOMO definitely kicks in. So yeah, the first point there, roll the transfer as often as possible. Fix the weakest link. And I've noted down small improvements over time. A good book recommendation actually for people. It's not FPL related, but you can definitely link it back. A Slight Edge. I can't remember. It might have been Jeff Olson, but very good book for life. Just about all aspects, financial and all that. Just about how those little things daily really, make a big difference over time, your compound interest and all that kind of stuff. And I like to think about my FPL team like that as well. You start off with whatever 15 that you land on for your game week 1 squad. Then with each passing game week, you've got one transfer, and you just make that small daily improvement or small weekly improvement in FPL. Don't ignore, a fire that you have, try and, put out that fire as quickly as possible, because quickly that fire can get out of control and you end up wildcarding when you don't want a wildcard and stuff like that. So I always try and think of that, whatever squad you start with in game week 1, try and just gradually improve it over time. And if you do that, very often you'll end up maybe 1 or 2 transfers ahead of your rivals, which can put you again in a very strong position. They're trying to get a player in that you already have, and you're already moving on to the next target. So I like that one, fixing the weakest link and small improvements. Next one, then we've got slow and steady wins the race. Don't go chasing. Again, that was reinforced for me last season. After the World Cup, I was ranked 1.1 million. When we finished in December or end of November, my initial thoughts were, right, I've got nothing to lose. I'm going to come back in late December, January, and just go differential, go rogue with captains. And then thankfully over the World Cup period, I calmed down and went back to my natural stances. You know what? The ranks are very bunched up nowadays, so you actually can rise over time slowly, and that's what I did. I didn't do anything too exciting, and kept it simple with captaincy, kept it simple with my unlimited transfers and my picks. Throughout the season, there was never, I never posted my team on a weekend and people were like, "Oh, he's gone rogue there." It was very much close to the template. Not that I followed it on purpose, but that just kind of happens naturally with good value players and good fixtures and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, slow and steady. People, when you're a content creator, you always get asked about, who are the best differentials, but I often think the best differentials are just no one. Just avoid differentials and actually go for the good picks from the good teams, because a differential is a differential for a reason, and more than likely they won't get you anywhere. So I do tend to just focus on the good picks, even if they've got high ownership. I just go with them. And then the final point is, don't sell good value performing assets. So if you've got a good pick, if he's having a good season, if he's ticking along very nicely, don't sell him. And the one that comes to mind from last season was Odegaard. I remember thinking at points, this is Odegaard's season. He's absolutely smashing it. And then maybe he went through 3 or 4 games where he was a bit quieter. Maybe the underlying numbers weren't as good. Maybe it was Martinelli and some of the others that were doing the business. I know a lot of people switched from Odegaard to Martinelli. I think I actually went to Bruno Fernandes from Odegaard, and I really regretted it, because Odegaard is my kind of player. You plug him in, He ticks along very nicely. Maybe nothing overly exciting in terms of points, but that was one of my regrets last year. So it's just a reminder for myself this season. If you've got a good pick, if they're performing well, if they're really good value, and in particular, like an Odegaard, in a really good team, be patient with those players. Even if they go 3 or 4 weeks, where they're a bit quieter, look what he did when a lot of us sold him. I think there was 3 or 4 double-digit hauls. So that was one that stung me a wee bit last year.
I got a few questions, I guess, for you as well. I love these lessons as well, and how to have a successful season, and hearing about kind of the 1 million rank and coming back. I think generally there's a few things I want to ask. So some of them from the live chat, and I think these are quite nice. So FPL Rubber Ducky, he says, if you start badly, you need to take the odd calculated risk. And I think I would agree with that, but that's something I saw last year. So I think if in game week 1 you are very differential, there's obviously more chance of having a bad start. And with the way last season went, it felt like those points were quite, bunched up, as you say, but it also felt like everyone had such similar teams towards the end. So it was really difficult to gain those ranks when you fell behind. And I guess that's kind of part of the tips that resonates with me from you, that actually if you start, with the right picks, you're never behind. So you're never playing catch up. So you never need to go differential because you're already at the top. So like in my best season, my lowest rank OR was in game week 1, but that was also in my top 5 best game week ranks of the year. So my game week rank was 39k, but I never fell below that season. And because I just happened to have a very good start, I think I had Ben Rahma and I had Antonio. I think I had Bruno and I had Rashford or something like this. I had 2 double up on attacks. They all popped in the first few weeks, and I just kind of never went below where I started, if you see what I mean. So I think there's obviously a lot of luck involved in that. But equally, if you put yourself in a position to get lucky and it goes wrong, like you double up on 2 attacks, neither do anything for the first few weeks and the majority went elsewhere, then you are playing catch up for the season. So I think I just wanted to add a bit of context to that, because it is right. You will have to maybe take some odd calculated risk, because would you rather finish 160k or 190k? Like really they're the same thing. But if you can push for like 100k in the last few weeks, then you would take the calculated risk. So I think there's that element of it for sure. But the one that I want to get your opinion on, Mark, so obviously I've responded to that one, is Cleo says, you will never win with that attitude. You have to take a risk at some point. So this is where I'd love to get your thoughts, because you are like this is a valid point, I think. And I think those who maybe upside chase more, or maybe traditionally, labeled as more likely to win FPL. So you might have like a few 30th in the world ranks, but then you have like a 7-digit rank. So there's a lot more fluctuation. And I think there are different ways to play, essentially, right? Like last year's winner, or was it the year before? I think it was last year, actually. Yeah. So, Ali didn't necessarily captain Haaland most weeks, like the rest of us did. So that kind of risk did pay off for him. He won ultimately. But will that sustain your rank over the years? So it depends kind of what you're going for, right? If you're trying to win, or are you trying to get consistent, like top 50k, top 10k?
Yeah, do you know what? I like this question, because I was actually asked a similar question on the Twitter Spaces last week as well, and it's kind of really challenged my thinking over the summer, which is good. And you're after saying there, what is my target nowadays? And you know what? I don't even know what my target is anymore, and maybe that's something I really need to evaluate this preseason, because it's probably part and parcel of becoming a content creator. You kind of fall into a trap of, let's just have a good season. Let's not have a shocker. I did have a shocker. I think it was 5 seasons back. I think it was 500k. Ironically, the first season I went full-time FPL content creation, made a lot of mistakes and learned a lot from it. But again, I think you will see a lot of content creators out there like myself that probably do play a safe game, and it's definitely a lot of it linked to what we do. At the end of the day, I'm paying my bills with my FPL content creation. So there is, I suppose, there's added pressure there to have a good season, because you're always thinking, right, if I have a decent season this year, that's good for business next year. But then when I think back to when I started playing this game, I'm someone who likes to win, and maybe I do need to really challenge myself and not be as safe. Maybe I do need to be a bit more, even just for one season, because at the end of the day, I think what I found, I did have a shocking season five years ago, and it didn't really impact my work too much. People really don't really care that much. Obviously, there's a lot of piranhas out there who do like to see you have a bad season if you're a content creator, and that's part of it too. You're trying to swim away.
They're
from
nibbling
those
away. I
piranhas.
was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, they're always there. They're just waiting.
So you raise an interesting point as well, because obviously there's been a lot of arguments in the Twitter community recently about people charging for content, and I think with you, I always remember he's one of the first people who's solo as well, who kind of is full time into FPL. You know, you led the way, you paved that path, and I think what you did is very different. I think what people are upset about is the idea of they consider it cheating if like people are paying to see a team behind the paywall. But whether you're using algorithms or whatever you're using, whether it's team reveals or algos or scrolling through Twitter for free, you're going to see people's teams and be influenced regardless, is my opinion. So who is there to kind of pile abuse onto people publicly for making a living? And I think that's maybe the difference, where for you it is a living and you do have to pay bills, as you said. So like, and that makes you want to play more safely, because obviously it's better if you can, like, you know, I think Harry, one of our friends of the show, like his last 3 ORs are like 2 top 5K, 1 top 1K, right? So being able to put that on your kind of graphic, and then you've got the trolls in the comments, as you say, the piranhas abusing you, they can abuse your thoughts as much as they want. But if you've got the rank history to prove it, obviously it helps. So I can see why it's riskier, and I feel the same. And I changed the way I played when we started making content. It's our 3rd full season, 4th season overall. And I did find myself not playing the way I want to. So I'm really glad you brought up the topic of kind of assessing what you want to get out of this season. Because I went from my best to my worst year. And now I'm like you very much in that I don't know what I want from next year. And I don't really want to play it safe, because I've already had a shit year anyway from a content point of view. So I might as well just go back to my roots.
Yeah, even just going back to the comment from the chat was like, you know, you'll never win playing that way. But I don't really agree with that, because I think you probably can if you're, you know, if you do run hot and you can have, you know, be on the right side of variance for a large part of the season. I think you probably can win playing pretty safely. And I think I guess the way I've always approached it is, and again, I go back to my terrible season. I do remember kind of stepping out of my comfort zone a couple of times that year. I remember kind of being talked into maybe a few more point sets than I would have usually taken. I was kind of a bit more open to them, and it really didn't sit. It just didn't suit my play style, and it really backfired on me. And I ended up on tilt, and I ended up just having, you know, making, you know, terrible decisions for most of the campaign. And then it was quite natural just to go back to what works the previous, you know, the next season after that. And again, I think every summer I have the same debate with myself. Do I be a late riser this season? Do I be more aggressive? Do I change up my strategy for one season? But then you're conflicted, because you're preaching patience to your subscribers, and you're saying, this is what worked for me. If you apply this strategy, there's a good chance it will work for you. So then it's quite hard to go off and do your own thing in the background, you know. I would love to run a little kind of second burner account, FPL account, and have a more aggressive play style, but that would just cause too much conflict within myself anyway, with two different teams. But yeah, it's definitely, I think I'm also, I just kind of always kind of fall back into my comfort zone as well, in terms of, this has worked for me, so why try and be someone I'm not? You know, why try be a late riser? Because if I try and play the way he does, or at least what he did, you know, a couple of seasons back, and, you know, some incredible ranks with that kind of more aggressive style, I just don't think I would pull it off as well as he can, because that suits him. That's his kind of style of play. He's been doing it for a long time. So yeah, I kind of default to what's worked before. Again, I'm a patient FPL manager. I kind of preach that in my content. So it's very hard to go against it. But again, you can, like I said, going back to it, can you win it playing this way? I've always thought that if I play this way for 30 weeks or 32 game weeks, and if I'm sitting at 1K in game week 32, that's when I'll probably change my approach. And
the last 6 weeks are when you can really make that push.
I would be completely open to going against the grain for the final 6 game weeks, if it's a chance to get a top 100 or a top 10 or even win it. So yeah, I like playing steady, playing safely, and then maybe reassessing things when we get to the final, 6 to 8 game weeks.
Perfect. I think we're going to go into the midfield episode. I feel like, even though I wanted to keep this bit short, it seemed like a waste of time to not treat it like a mini interview and interrogate you while you were here on the ship and have no way to get to safe landing. But you survived. You've done well. I've put a poll question out asking, is paying for FPL content supporting the content creator or cheating? and 92% so far have said support. So that's nice to see, as we say. It just depends what you're looking to get out of it. And with 11 million players, there's always going to be people who are obviously going to be willing to pay to what people are considering cheating. But is following a team reveal any different to paying for like FPL review and seeing suggested transfers from AI? Is it any different from, looking at predicted point scores in algorithms on other sites? I have membership to every tool, but that's just because we're fanatics. We love this game. And people say, yeah, but you're getting an edge that content creator can distill like the best picks in short time. But this isn't a game of 100% certainty. Just because someone says this is who's in their team doesn't mean that's going to be the right pick or get you the points. So in reality, how can something be cheating, in my opinion, if there is no objective kind of way to analyze it afterwards? Because there's so much, what's our favorite word? Variance. Like what I always say, my one lesson, I guess, Mark, just as we go to the midfielders is, I try to, people ask me what's the first tip for someone who's turning from like a casual into a more engaged manager. And I say, try to figure out for you, what is the right decision, wrong outcome, and what is the wrong decision, right outcome, and try to learn the difference. And I think that goes back to kind of just the final bit that you said, which is it's about playing your way and your style. Late riser style wouldn't suit you. So we all have to figure out what's our style. What do we enjoy? How do we have fun at FPL? So I think before we go to the midfielders, I did realize there's actually a new piece of content this week, and I think we're going to all plot ourselves on the chart. So I'll hand over to Gabe to explain this new part of the show, and I think we're going to start plotting everyone into this chart. And if you're listening in the live chat, please do let us know which section of the chart you think you fall onto. What do you think, Gabe?
Yeah, here we go. The ideological spectrum of, let's just say, of the FPL player, and I would say, like, wherever you see yourself on this chart, and I'll go over it in just a moment here. Just know that, we always say it is about process, and wherever you see yourself now, that's just where you are now in your process. The season's going to go on, and like Mark was saying, maybe on that tough season when you're trying to do different things and playing outside of yourself, you can be moved around, right? You can go, like, if I'm playing of a style that's not, natural to me, I could move to a pretender or to different places. So this is just kind of like a little snapshot. So on the x-axis, we have some kind of 5 stages from the bottom to the top, from the narrative stage of looking at kind of analyzing FPL assets and situations. So I'll go up: narrative, conversational, strategic, analytical, complex. And then from left to right that's the y-axis. From left to right on the x-axis, you go from template on the left side to maverick on the right side, with some little kind of descriptors there for ease. And then you see some there. So there are some kind of the extremes right there. There are 4 red circles on the extremes. So on the template side, the template narrative is mindless. The template complex is the pretender. The maverick complex is desperate, and the maverick narrative is just no. And then kind of like right next to those, we have the 2 confirmation bias. You can either get your confirmation bias on the template side, or you can get your confirmation bias on the maverick side. And kind of right in the center is a big green circle where it says balance and have fun. And you can see that the green goes from down to conversational, right? You don't have to play the game seriously. You don't have to get into anything. You can just like talk with your friends and talk about football and have fun, right? The complexity is up to you. But I do find that if you make it overly complex, then it starts to erode at the fun. So the fun doesn't go all the way to the top. And I think I will say there are exceptions to this. I mean, some people, I think I'm an exception sometimes. Maybe some stats people could be exceptions when they get super complicated into their metrics, and they might enjoy that stuff. But we're looking for kind of just like a balanced approach that suits our own personalities and suits our style. And at the very top, kind of like the ideological, the kind of what we're shooting for here is kind of an approach that's process centric, so not based on results, where we can always improve our own process. I do think after a while you start learning more about yourself and less about the FPL game after a certain amount of seasons. And it's really, well, who was I in that season instead of what was the game like? So nuanced perspectives, multiple sources, non-dogmatic, so you can consider multiple perspectives at one time. One thing can be true and another thing can be true at the same time. Willing to be wrong and not willing to be spoon-fed, and that one's in there for the haulers because we know it's a favorite one on the show.
Definitely. And I think, Mark, we asked you before the show where you saw yourself. And I know you mentioned on Sunday night when you saw this, you thought, you know what, I need to take a moment to digest this and do it not under the influence, I'm guessing.
Yeah, Gabe sent us across on Sunday. I had a big Saturday, and I looked at it on Sunday morning while I was still couldn't see straight, lying in bed. I thought this is way too complicated for being hungover. So I gave it 24 hours and I came back to it. And even then, I don't think I'm clever enough to fully understand everything that's going on here. But I certainly think I definitely haven't always been in the same place on this chart. Like Gabe said, you can certainly move around throughout your FPL career, and there was definitely a couple of seasons where I took things too seriously and let the game annoy me too much. And thankfully, over the last 3, 4, 5 seasons, I've really worked hard on that. And the have fun approach is my mantra. You know, always got to remind yourself that, well, at least I do, why I got into this game. You know, I really enjoyed watching the Premier League. This was just a lovely little addition that gave me, you know, a much bigger love for the league and all the teams in it and all the players. And it was just a really enjoyable game to play, kind of coming from a football manager background previously. It was just like a nice little step up. You know, it almost felt like you graduate from your football manager career and you step into the real world of management with fantasy. If you're not going to make it as a real world football manager, this is the peak. So yeah, I think I'll be honest, I just took the easy option and just banged myself right in the middle of this chart. I seen balance, I seen have fun. I'm like, right, that sounds like me. But I did deliberately put myself, you know, down below analytical because I'm more of a grass FC manager. I watch a lot of games. I'm more about the eye test. I do look at stats, of course, because it's part of, you know, content creation. You need to know what's going on, but it's more of a, you know, maybe just a backup to see if my eyes are playing tricks on me, to make sure I'm seeing the same things that the numbers are saying, or maybe just to fill a few gaps. Maybe I haven't seen a game or haven't caught the highlights of a specific game, and obviously the numbers are really useful for that. Definitely more analytical than I was maybe 10 seasons ago, but certainly I don't go too deep with numbers. Last season, I think, was the first time I signed up to an FPL review subscription, and it was more just I was kind of fascinated about what everyone else was doing and what everyone was getting from it. And I says, you know, I'll just check it out. And I thought it was fantastic, but it wasn't really for me. It's not, again, it just goes back to what kind of manager am I? I'm someone who likes to watch games. I'm lucky enough I've got time to do so because I do this for a living. And I find because I watch a lot of games, I don't need to lean as heavily on the numbers. So yeah, FPL review, I find myself maybe looking at it a fair bit, maybe early part of last season, and then kind of tailed away and just went back to my natural style of watching the games, make my own watch lists, watching highlights, looking at a few stats, you know, on the usual websites, rather than really, you know, following religiously what FPL review is doing. I did, you know, find it interesting, you know, the suggested transfers, but I often find myself maybe disagreeing with some of them. You know, some of the players, like, it would often suggest Ederson, but quite simply, I just like a 4.5 million goalkeeper. And then, you know, I think like Lewis Dunk used to show up quite often, but I just didn't really rate, you know, Brighton.
I think that's the beauty of this data, right? It's a bit like our FDRs and the net XG. It gives you the numbers under certain inputs, but then there's context to paint. And I know that a lot of people who do use review, the premium version, they will like exclude or force exclude. So like in your case, they might force exclude Edison, or, you know, make certain rules and start to see, does what they're wanting to do match what they were going to do anyway. So like for me last year, I used the free version of review, and there was transfers I was going to make with 2 free transfers, and it was recommending similar ones, but then giving me ideas about like 5-6 other mids or 5-6 other defenders in that 2-way move that I hadn't considered. And then what that made me do is go and watch those players or watch their highlights, or, you know, look at their data and heat maps and be like, oh, okay, I'm going to be more open-minded. So I think people who say that like blindly following these tools, that's one thing. But I think using as many tools as you can to help you kind of play the way you want to play, as you said, is quite important. And someone in the chat asked, are you supposed to be having fun? So I think that's a key thing to look over as well. You know, obviously, like, I would say FPL is torture, and the most fun is now in the preseason before you even start to see the weekly red arrows. So for me, that's that case. But we'll go to midfielders because we are 34 minutes in. If you're in the podcast version, please do come to the 34-minute timestamp. And this graphic, I know Gabe explained it, but you need to see it and then take 24 hours like Mark did to digest it. It took me about a week to digest it. So people in the chat are saying this is so complicated, and yeah, I think that's totally right. Yeah. Let's just go to the midfielders. I think is the main thing here. I say that, but there is a philosophy to come. Do you want to do the philosophy before the Q&A later, Gabe, and I come back to this?
Should we do it later, Gabe? Yeah,
that's fair. Yeah, let's get to the midfielders. I agree.
Cool. All right, we will come back to it though.
All right.
We'll let you take this away, Chris. This is
all right. Well,
your bad boy.
This is already stuff that we've already seen. So just for the benefit of the people who are joining us, perhaps for the first time, or just to remind people, we don't work on the standard fixture difficulty. Just 5 colours. Basically similar if you're looking from the perspective of what you're seeing on the screen. Green is good, but obviously darker green's better. Darker red is worse. And it's matching home against away. Big chances and XG, generally speaking, is what it uses. Big chances for and against, conceded and also created, and also XG created and conceded. So that's roughly what it works out with. Now, it works on a 0 to 7 basis. That's down to Ben Crellin's spreadsheet from years ago. And what it does is it literally matches one up against the other. The art of matchups is what me and Gabe use. We use it all the time. We match everything up. We match players up. We match positions up. We match teams up. We match everything up, really, quite frankly. To cut a long story short,
we've even tried some matchmaking.
Well, have we? We haven't done FPL Tinder yet. That's the next one. But anyway, that's maybe a good topic. Actually, we try that one week. But anyway, let's have a quick look at this. And what I've done is I've ringed what the fixture difficulty considers are the good fixtures. Okay, and also on the far side, in the very right hand side, I've ranked the teams with respect to fixtures. First of all, through 1 to 5, and then 6 to 10. So if we look at who's got the best rankings between 1 and 5, Arsenal, Brighton, City, United, and Newcastle. Hardly rocket science, is it? It's pretty similar. Interestingly enough, Liverpool are 6th through 1 to 5, and then jump to 1st, 6 to 10. So Liverpool looks like they will improve, or the matchups look better for the second half of this first 10-week period than the first half. Arsenal have 3 reds, Forest, Fulham, and even Manchester United at home. That's a strange one. I don't quite know where that comes from. Brighton have 3, Luton, West Ham, and Newcastle. Luton particularly looks a good fixture for Brighton. City have 3, and they're the only ones who are able to generate very big fixture difficulty positives away from home. But the caveats there is they're against the promoted teams, and we really don't know how they're going to perform at home. Luton probably won't perform very well at home at all because they're not playing at home yet, are they, by the sound of things? But teams like Burnley is going to be tough. I think they're not. It's not going to be as easy as people think. Burnley, Sheffield United, Bramall Lane, another tough place to go. I think they've got enough to win. Whether they've got enough to thrash teams or not remains to be seen. United have 3, home Wolves, home Forest, both lovely fixtures, and then Brighton, oddly. Newcastle have 3, home Villa, home Liverpool, home Brentford. Newcastle are very good at home, as we've said, and Liverpool have got 2, home Bournemouth, home Villa. But there's caveats. For example, what's his name? Torres at Villa, for example. Players coming in, new players coming in, players leaving. Take it with a pinch of salt. But I think the first thing I would say, Mark, I'd just like you to comment on this. I have a very strong feeling that the template's going to be fairly strong to start with. These same protagonists, these same teams seem to be jumping to the top again. It seems very similar to the end of last season to me, if you ask me.
Yeah, and it's a shame, really. It would have been nice if some of those players that we had from the better teams last season, if they had really difficult starts. But teams like Brighton, Arsenal again. A lot of people are just going to gravitate quite naturally to what worked for them last season. the fixtures match up first couple of game weeks. So it seems quite difficult almost to pick a bad team in game week 1, and to pick a team that really falls behind the pack, unless you tinker every day between now and the start of the season. But yeah, it's a little bit disappointing the way the fixtures have fallen, I think, because again, the drafts I'm seeing, even the 1 or 2 drafts I put together, there's a lot of familiar faces in there. But again, interesting to see this FDR, because I haven't really looked too much past the first 4 game weeks, so it's always good to see what kind of changes in those, game week 5 to game week 10, and Liverpool, for example. So it's good to keep this all in mind. If you don't end up playing an early wildcard, you've got to keep in mind what players and what teams you might end up targeting after 4, 5, 6 game weeks.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the important point. And what we've got here as well, Mark, and I'll move on to it now, is there's another metric which we use as well for fixture difficulty, mine's very much on numbers. Gabe's also is numbers, but what Gabe does is with his fixture difficulty, it's called net XG, he also takes into account the goalkeeper, and in particular how the goalkeeper prevents shot goals. So Gabe, should we just put the net XG up? I'll let you just quickly run through that. But yeah, I mean, again, it's your baby, so I'll let you do this slide.
Yeah, so a couple of things that NetXG does, just off the top of my head, that's a little bit different from the previous FDRs. The NetXG, the zonal matchups are factored in. They're baked into the NetXG, so left, right, and center chances created against chances conceded. And then the other thing that's baked in there, like Mariner was saying, is a goalkeeper. So I created a goalkeeper metric about like roughly how I'm trying to get to a metric that gives me a general idea about how much the goalkeeper takes away from opposing, not even expected goals, almost like from opposing goals. It's a work in progress, as everything is, but it's promising early starts. So for game weeks 1 through 5, the top for net XG is we have Manchester City's top, Arsenal second, followed by Spurs. Interestingly, because my metrics usually have a bias against Spurs, so that's
very true. Yes,
baked in there. And then Manchester United, just a little bit behind Spurs there, which is another interesting conversation, given that the FDR treats Man United so well. And that's 1 through 5, and then moving on to 6 through 10. If you look at the relationships 1 through 5, 6 to 10, Arsenal roughly the same from 9.1, they go up to 10.1, and they are the best for 6 through 10. I think in your FDR, Mariner, Arsenal went up slightly as well, but I don't. Yes. I think they aren't the best, right, for 6 through 10.
No, they're not. They went from 8 to 9.8. In fact, nowhere near actually. It's Manchester United and Liverpool actually stand out. Actually, 6 through 10 on mine. So yeah, I mean, again, what we tend to do, just to give everybody, the people who are listening and watching, we do average these, don't we, from the perspective of what we're doing with the midfielders later on. So what we've actually done is we've baked in, we've averaged them, because there are some variances, but then again, there are some which there's quite a bit of agreement as well, Gabe, isn't there?
Right. And sometimes there could be differences in the FDRs, but the progression, like if you look at 1 through 5 and 6 to 10, those relationships are the same in the 2 FDRs. So then these are all like little breadcrumbs, right? And then you start to pick them apart, and that's kind of what we do on the show.
Yeah.
So 6 through 10, Arsenal first, 10.1. Then you have a 3 at 8.8. It's Liverpool, City, and Newcastle at 8.8. Followed by 8.3, United at 8.3. Interestingly, United kind of like they hover around the 4th and the 5th best for 1 through 5 and 6 through 10. Whereas other people's FDRs, I think, see United's fixtures kind of turning. NetXG sees them kind of like, if you go in on United assets, as long as they're doing what you expected them to do, you're probably hanging on to them.
Yeah. Yep, I think that's fair. Shall I quickly put the zonals up, and then we'll dive into the actual midfielders themselves? I just wanted to show the zonals as well this week, because albeit there's quite a lot to, shall we say, to unpack with respect to zonals, and particularly so many new changes. But I think, look, in very, very general terms, if you were looking at game week 1, and everything happens as we expected to happen based on last season, the end of last season, then what you would see is if you're looking at Arsenal, you'd look at the left-hand side as being better. Arsenal's left, 3.7 against 2.9 and 2.8. Brentford's left as well. Liverpool's centre, 4.2. Manchester City's left and centre, 4.4, 4.7. These are chances in that zone, home against. So basically, chances created against chances conceded, attack against defence, whether they're home or away, and then averaged, just to let people know how this works again. And then Manchester United through the centre, 5.2, and right, 4.1. So that's game week 1. Now, obviously, if we were to look at the first 5, looking at it slightly differently, who have we got looking better here? Brighton right over centre and left. Centre second, left third. Chelsea centre, interestingly. Everton all the way across look like chances. Now, this is interesting because Everton obviously are priced very favourably indeed for the game this season. So that suggests there might be something. I know it's Dyche ball and this, that and the other, but who knows? Liverpool all the way across look pretty good, although the historic right-hand side upside from Salah has now gone. It's completely gone. It used to be as strong as anything, Gabe, didn't it? But for a couple of seasons, it was very much down the right. Now it's changed considerably.
So that was playing wider back then.
Yeah. So it's probably just on about where he's gone, right? Mm-hmm. And then Manchester City left and centre, Manchester United left and centre. And you can see again 6 to 9 as well. Please come and have a look at the slide. For the benefit of time, 46 minutes in, come and look at this slide. I am on the fence about this slide, Mark, at this moment in time. And the reason is because so much is changing. But I think you can probably get the gist of how this works and how potentially we can use this as we get going and learn, and then hopefully pick the right players on the back of it.
Yeah, that's fair. I'll be honest with you. As someone who is very much an eye test manager, you've probably given me the biggest headache I've ever had in the last 3 slides with all those numbers. But something the zonal one is something I'll definitely come back to. It's people, I'll often get comments on for questions for podcasts and stuff like that. They'll always ask me stuff about teams attack down the left, down the right, in the center. And being honest, it's something I've never really factored into my FPL decision making. Maybe sometimes I might think, right, Harvey Barnes is up against a Wan-Bissaka, or Harvey Barnes is up against a Joel Ward, and just on a very simplistic level, I'll kind of think about it without looking at any numbers in terms of the quality of the matchups. But this slide in particular, the zonals one, is something I'm going to go back and have a look at, because I haven't really seen a chart like that before. So thanks for highlighting that to me. And I'm certainly going to spend an hour or two looking at that over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think the caveats is that it's split into zones, isn't it? Into thirds. So obviously it's where the chance is created from. So if the player cuts in, for example, it may be that the chance goes from the left into the centre, or from the right into the centre, for example, Gabe.
Yeah, and it's cool that this is the first time Mark's seeing this, because we are pretty proud of this, baby. This is like our signature piece that we brought into the community, and it's interesting that since it's small chances, you have all of this really needs context, so it's actually great for an eye test manager. For example, like it's not showing up, like the Brighton zonals aren't showing up, but for example, if the Brighton right zonal matchup is showing up, then Solly March, we know how he can create chances. He's got a great cross on him. He's got good vision and all of that. So then you want to see, like, well, the chance creation will come from Solly March, but probably for others. Whereas some of the other ones, like let's just go to the other side, Mitoma. If Mitoma creates a chance, he's probably creating it for somebody kind of running into the half space just inside of him, maybe for the same side or for the center. So these zonals always need some context based on on the eye test to tell you how the zonal matchups are going to kind of manifest in a game.
Yeah. But I think it's something that we can just bookmark and just think when we're talking about when we're talking about midfielders, which we're going to dive into right now. So let's just remember that, just because it may be that what we do is refer back to this going forward. So let's start with budget midfield then. So what I've done, and I've done this slightly differently than what I did for the defenders last week, is that what I've done is I've thrown in some more, should we say, on-field stats this time now to make it a little bit more clarity. What we use, Mark, to let you know, is we use percentile. So rather than actual numbers, so 100's obviously the very best for that. So someone somewhere, unless there's a tie, has 100 for XG. Someone's etc. And someone's got the other people are going to get nothing or very low, obviously, if they've got no XG. And it's basically just how it works. So again, all the way through, different factors, minutes, XG, XA, etc. So if we were to look at this very, very quickly, the players I've put on the screen actually are Everton assets in Dwight McNeil and Damari Gray. Although there's a rumour, I think I saw today, that someone said that Gray might be going. I don't know. But anyway, let's leave him up there for now. McNeil, he tops XA and he tops big chances created. This is interesting because, again, also, he's one of the few players, and he's not top for minutes, but he's one of the few players at this bracket who actually has reasonable, is fairly nailed. He's well liked by Dyche, of course. He's played under him before. He's all of a sudden come to the fore with respect to Everton, I think. And to be honest, he sits in third place behind Willock and Rodri, but neither of those really are what we would probably be looking at, because we're probably going to be looking at other assets from that team. So I think the first player who really springs out at this 4.5 to 5.5 sort of level, and bear in mind there's no 4.5s there, that tells you what I think of that area, is McNeil. Andreas is injured. The next player we come to is Casemiro. Now, 5.5. Mark, you're a Manchester United fan, obviously. Is there any value in Casemiro, or are we again going to be in the same? Are we just looking at it? Are we trying to be too clever thinking about a player like Casemiro? I'll come on to his other numbers in a minute. But obviously, the one thing about this, which is very, very obvious, I think, is that when you look at these players, he's the only one, apart from Rodri, who we probably wouldn't go anywhere near, who is coming out of a decent team.
Yeah, I think what quite a few of these 5.5 million options highlight is one of the downsides of FPL, that these defensively minded midfielders just unfortunately get ignored and get completely overlooked, because, again, you've got Rodri at City, Casemiro at United, and now Declan Rice at Arsenal. You're going to be looking at 5 or 6 assets in those teams before you even look at a 5.5 million midfielder. So yeah, I've enjoyed owning Casemiro in particular in other fantasy formats that award your, interceptions and tackles and all that kind of stuff. And he can be a beast. And Rodri in particular can be one of actually the best fantasy.
He has like a 5-point floor, right? In Sky, for example. Like, you just know he's going to get it.
But that's the issue with FPL. These guys, unfortunately, because of their teammates and what they can offer, Casemiro, for example, I think my current draft has Luke Shaw, Bruno, and Rashford. So straight away, there's not a spot for him. But was actually those Dwight McNeil numbers are going to stay in my mind, I think, throughout the summer. I don't think I'll be shopping in this price bracket, but it's good to know if I do. There's some context here. There's some numbers here, and McNeil, I've always liked him as a player. No disrespect to Everton, but I actually think he could step up and play, a little bit higher in the league. The set pieces are quite attractive. He's got Tarkowski's big noggin to aim for. So I think if I was forced, gun to my head, by a 5.5 million midfielder, looking at these numbers, McNeil actually is quite attractive.
Yeah. Gabe, any view?
Yeah, I think that's a good exercise just to kind of breeze past this price bracket. Like, gun to your head, which one would you buy? And I'll go with Billing. I just like Iraola brings this high flying, high risk, high reward kind of like set up. His defenders just like go after the ball, and when they get the ball, they're very direct. So I think Billing is just going to be constantly the link player. He's going to be kind of like McNeil was towards the end of the season last season, where when Everton would win the ball, he'd like get that ball wide to McNeil, then everybody bomb forward. And I think Iraola is going to do something similar, and I think Billing is going to be really at the center of that kind of the transitions for Bournemouth. So I thought he was great at Rayo Vallecano. So like for the fun factor, and for I like Billing as a player. He reminds me of Socrates. So I'll go with him.
Yeah, another player of interest at 5.5, probably a bit more punty than McNeil, and minutes not terrible, is Sade from Brentford as well. 76 for points, 82 for goals, 87 for big chances. Minute obviously only really came in. So another player there who has been spoken about in pre-season. Although I think when I move on to the next slide, I think what you'll see is that, because this now factors in the fixture difficulty and the net XG into it and tries to metric this, and it summarizes it a little bit more. Obviously, what you're seeing is obviously players like Casemiro jump up. McNeil's fixtures are not too bad, although there's a disparity. My fixture difficulty likes them. Gabe's net XG doesn't, not so much. But the value is very key for me by the looks of things for McNeil. 81 minutes, 73 points, 93 for involvement. I mean, McNeil's involvement, he was involved in 37% of Everton's goals. 37%. So that's quite high,
Yeah, but it's usually goal singular, no S.
Yes, it's 30% of the goals that they score. I was going to clarify that.
No,
yeah.
of the goal.
Which might not be many.
One goal a game.
But yeah, 36 out of 38 appearance, 7 goals, 5 assists from 3.51 XG, 5.45 XA, 126 total points, 14 bonus points. It's not that bad. Sade, on the other hand, expected points 26.3, actual 16, no goals, no assists, but clearly from that perspective looks like that there's something there. But I think, look, from the perspective of it, Nima, very quickly before I jump through, if you were to go gun to head, who would you go with at 5.5 if you had to?
I'd go 4.5, and I'd get Nakamba on my bench at 4.42.
I'm just going to caveat this. Enciso's not in minutes. Mm-hmm. Murphy's not in minutes. Okay, they're below the threshold for it, so we can remember those, because there's 2 players I don't want to forget about. All right, Gabe. Before we start on
really quickly before we get to the 6 million, there is one that and Andy brought up in the chat.
Right.
I think Kovacic is an interesting conversation.
Right. Okay.
I don't know how, like, we know he can get forward. He got forward and was he's like still playing behind the front 5, but he's kind of further up the field, and he can certainly do that with City. I don't know what I don't know exactly what his role will be, and I don't know if there's anything left on the bone after all the other attackers get kind of like get their share. But I definitely one for the watch list, I think.
Okay. I'll put the screen back up, because I know you wanted to do a little section on Brian Mposto, as I call him, because they always used to hit the post, Mark. So I've also got another one, which is Ollie Watkins. He's been nicknamed Woodworkio, by the way. There's another one for you. But there you go. Our mate Brian. Gabe, over to you. All aboard the Mbomobile.
Mbomobile. And Mark mentioned actually in his recent pod, he mentioned all the posts that Mbomo used to hit. So
he's good at it, right?
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about his role, because once everybody learned that, it seems like a lot of people, once they learned that Tony was going to be suspended, they kind of anointed Mbomo as the 9, and I don't think we really have much evidence to that account, but that doesn't mean that he's not a good asset and highly involved. So I just want to go over really quickly some patterns that I saw. I went back and watched I watched highlights, I watched some games, and I went back and looked at the stats as well. And these are kind of like just some observations I came up
All right.
with.
Well, I'm going to put this slide on the screen, but I'm warning you in advance. It will be on the screen for 60 seconds, then I'm taking it off because it's a giant mess. But
there's a lot of shit on here, to be sure. But so there are areas like when you do come back and look at it at 59 minutes, almost on the hour mark here, the underlined areas.
For 59 minutes. There's something about 59 minutes, isn't there? There we go.
It's perfect. So the underlined areas kind of like they go together. So you see these are in the an analysis of the 5 matches Brentford played without Tony last season. Pete at FPL MF Doom or something like that on Twitter has a great statistical analysis. So for more about the stats, go to his profile, and he's got a great thread there. But I wanted to go into the specific goals and see exactly how they happen. So Forest 2, Brentford 2. Wissa kind of gets isolated against center backs. That's a theme. If Brendan Johnson isn't signed, if Forest looks like they might sell Brendan Johnson for £50 million to Brentford. If that happens, then this is going to change some things. But if it doesn't happen, I think what I saw from Brentford is that Wissa will play that 9, and what they'll look for, kind of like their first look, he's the first option. Wissa isolated against big, slow center backs in space. However, that's often not there. He's usually covered by 2 players or 3 players, and that's where Mbeumo comes in. Mbeumo is like the second option for everything on this team, and those second options pile up for like a mid to upper table team like Brentford. The second options pile up, and I think that's the attractiveness of Mbeumo. So when the option to Wissa isn't there, it's Brian on the weak side. It's like Brian will be isolated on that far side, because what Brentford does is they kind of funnel a lot of their creativity to the left-hand side. Shad was a good fit on the left wing because of that, because he's a bigger body. He's 6'1", so they can send direct balls to Shad instead of Tony and keep Wissa in the middle. That's why they didn't they didn't switch them and put Wissa can play on the left as well. But I think they liked Shad. They liked Wissa's pace more than Shad's physicality centrally. At least that's what I saw given the existing personnel. Brentford want to squeeze everything in midfield. All their midfielders kind of like their counter press is intense in that midfield. And once they get the ball, it's forward. And if forward isn't on, then it's to the other side to Mbeumo. And then Mbeumo has several ways to FPL points. He can obviously score when he's not hitting the woodwork. He's on corners. And towards the end of the season, his corners were they were banging with their corners. He got several assists from corners, more so towards the end of the season than at the beginning. So we'll see if that continues. Maybe it was a little bit of overperformance. There's definitely a case for Brian Mbeumo. And I went into this thinking there wasn't a case. I thought people had created a narrative. I was right about the narrative, but I was wrong about the evaluation of Mbeumo. So apologies to Brian.
Just as a question there, do you guys feel that Sade could act as the target man in this situation, and at 5.5 mil in midfield, could he be the dark horse in that price bracket?
So he'll be the target on the long balls in the left half space, but not so much in the box. In fact, there were several. Wissa had a couple of goals that were, or one goal and one almost goal that was a cross from Shad. And Shad actually, I didn't think he was a good crosser until the end of last season, and he put in some good crosses specifically for smaller players like Mbeumo and Wissa. So I don't think he'll be the central point of the attack. I think if they look for a bigger body, it'll be bringing in Brendan Johnson from Forest.
Just a quick shout out. Thank you, Zach, for becoming a YouTube member. Big shout out. Chris, put your volume down. I'm going to put the full blast version.
Don't play the loud one.
That's the only one I can play. So put your volume down. I'm giving you a 2 second.
Hang on a minute. I'll have to mute it then.
Wait, 3, 2, 1. Thank you, Zach, again. All right. Thank you to our new fellow, Zach.
That's too loud. I tell you what, it's a good job. It worked. I was running around the house thinking the fire alarm had gone off earlier.
Yeah, for those who don't know, I was testing it backstage, and Chris was there, but not actually at his computer, and he could just hear this siren going off as I pressed it about 20 times, and he started to pick up his phone. He tried to call the fireplace. He was in trouble. But yeah, we'll go to the more exciting midfielders. I think the bottom line is most people are playing 5-man midfield. Then
let's get going. So right now we're getting into the meat of this, I think. And what I've done is midfield between 6 and 7.5 million on the field stats. Now, interestingly enough, I've put Foden, and I've put Sterling on the slide. And I'm going to come back to that for a reason why in a moment. But if we're looking at purely on data, and I'll run across, if you're talking about XG, who tops it, it's actually Havertz of all people. Then McAllister, obviously we know what's happened to him, and then Solly March. XA, March. Points, March. Goals. Actually, I've got that wrong. It's Foden. There we go. Assists, Grealish. Involvement, Maddison. Big chances, Havertz. Big chances created, March. Shots on target, March. And then shots in the box, Havertz. Now, of course, there's lots more information there on this slide. There's tons of information there, quite frankly. Minutes-wise, and obviously there's a lot more rotation in this, and there's some injuries, so this is all caveated. But Mbeumo, Mitoma, Bowen are the standouts there. Players like Havertz, Ramsey's in there at 6 million, although he's injured at the moment. I think he's still injured, isn't he, Ramsey? I'm pretty sure he is.
100.
Yeah. And the reason I've put Foden and Sterling on the screen is because they're sitting there quite happily, third and fourth, behind March and Grealish. But their minutes are right down, 38 and 39, with respect to the centile. I actually think there's upside in both of those players, guys. I mean, we're going to come on to Brighton in a lot more detail with respect to players like March. Grealish and Foden obviously probably could be discussed at the same time. But I'm going to come straight to you. Mark, to you. Is Sterling potentially a 7 million cheat code? I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted there. Yeah, Sterling definitely one of the price reveals that caught the eye the most. Reminded me of Rashford's 3 million price drop. Sterling was once, I'm pretty sure he was 12 million at one point when he played for Man City. I think he's got something ridiculous like 115 goals, 98 assists in FPL. The pedigree is absolutely there. So Chelsea are a very, very interesting prospect this season. Sterling, you've got Sterling and Foden on the screen.
Yeah.
I think with Sterling in particular, I think I'll take a watching brief on Chelsea just to see how Pochettino sets them up, how they perform first couple of games. I always think with these kind of, again, it goes back to my point at the start, differentials. You don't need to be the first owner of Sterling at 7 million. You can buy him and give me 2, give me 3, give me 4. You can just buy yourself a bit of time and just make sure that you're going to get something, or at least have a good chance of getting something. So, but certainly his price stood out. There's probably 3, 4, 5 players that really caught the eye in terms of price. Bruno Fernandes was one, but Raheem Sterling was in the same bracket. So again, I think this overall, almost all those names on the screen, it's a very, very interesting price bracket. And I've only made 2 drafts so far, but I've probably already had 6 or 7 of these guys in both drafts. Sterling and Foden have been in neither. I don't think Sterling will make it into any of them unless he has a phenomenal preseason. But Foden hasn't been in any draft, but as we get closer to kickoff, if we get some positive words from Pep, if we get positive minutes, Community Shield is going to be a big one. If he starts that one, I think there'll be a huge Foden bandwagon for game week 1. So, yeah, the March numbers have really, really surprised me here. I know he had a good season, but as an eye test manager, I didn't. If you put up the names and you told me he was going to come out and top in most metrics, I probably wouldn't have said Solly March. So that's really caught my eye.
No, I tell you what, I'm shocked. I think, again, maybe someone wants to check, but I think from memory, Mitoma might be around 30% owned, and I think March might be 10 times less right now. Something like that.
Yeah, I think you're probably you're definitely not far off on that, because I don't think I've seen Solly March in a single draft. And
yeah, well, he's in March.
You look at these So we know who's going to win FPL this year. Then it's going to be the
no, because I'll tell you what I'll do. You see, is I'll listen to Nima, and then all the wheels will fall off, because that's what happened last time when I got close.
Yeah.
No. I didn't buy those Chelsea players like you in the Gameweek. I spoke to a Chelsea fan and got conclusive response that said, "Are you mad? What are you doing?"
And then you never told
Werner?"
me. Yeah, thanks. But just anyway, just a little bit of a side issue before I bring you in, Gabe, on this. There was one other player who obviously has departed this, and that's Mahrez. And of course, even Mahrez, even in departing the FPL game, still trolled me because I had to change all the slides. Can you believe it? Even when he leaves, he trolls me, that man. But my question, Gabe, is Foden potentially a more attractive asset now? We're starting to. I mean, we've obviously got potentially. I think KDB's injured. We've obviously got other players coming to the fore here. We'll probably talk about Alvarez next week when we talk about forwards. But I think for me, Foden's just starting to just get my juices flowing a little bit. I've got a funny feeling about him. Where are you with it?
Yeah, I mean, he's currently in my draft. I think he's definitely obviously worth consideration. I just there are a lot of questions, right? Bernardo Silva hasn't been sold. Will Foden even get time on the pitch if Pep goes to kind of like the 4-2-4 with Alvarez in there? I don't know. Like I just he's in my draft because I think he will start, but and if he does start the season, then he's a no-brainer at that price. As someone in the chat's agreeing, like his price is he's just so underpriced if he's starting that he's going to be one of those like maybe yo-yo players where when he's starting, everybody brings him in, and then he misses a game and everybody sells him, and it's going to be like big swings, and I think he may be a player you may have to tell yourself if you get him, you may have to exercise patience and maybe have a good playing sub player, first sub, someone like that, like a third forward, like a Joao Pedro or a fifth midfielder, one of the cheaper ones that we talked about earlier, to cover. But I think if he starts, it's really exciting. Like I think he's an obvious pick if he starts.
Yeah.
He's in my draft as well,
Yeah.
and I think one thing, just obviously you'll cover it next week in the forwards episode, but someone tweeted like the spread betting market and the change in it for like number of Premier League goals this season, and Alvarez is shot up in terms of like positive change with some of the outgoings like Mahrez. So although I think I have Foden now, I am starting to wonder what we might see from Alvarez in preseason if we see more of him as well on the pitch. So he's an even more exciting pick if maybe you can get triple City attack and they will all cameo, right? Hopefully.
It's a very interesting topic. I mean, obviously we'll come on to the forwards next week. What I've done, I've just changed it over whilst you were talking, Nima, there, is I've now put the value in. So now we're talking at, minutes per million, points per 90 per million, involvement per million, everything per million now. And
March is still there, that bastard.
And March is still there. He's still there, and he is above Mitoma. Obviously, their fixture difficulties are pretty good, and you'll see on the left-hand side there, just left of centre, you'll see fixture difficulty 5 and net XG 5. And what you'll see there is you'll see Manchester City very, very good, 93-94. Arsenal 88 and 88. Spurs 83 and 83. You see a little bit of divergence for Brighton 98-62. And you'll see Chelsea 75-49. So that might be another reason, Mark, why you might want to just leave Chelsea just to start with, because, game week 3 is when their fixtures start to really look a lot juicier. So I think maybe for that reason, they are a watching brief anyway. I tend to agree with you. But March and Mitoma, and this is what really surprises me. I mean, they're both very, very good. They're the top two here. But the ownership is, as I said earlier on, the ownership is completely skewed towards Mitoma. And, I might see an opportunity here, particularly with that zonal matchup, because if that zonal matchup plays out, it's playing into March. It's playing into March's favour.
It's not good for any of them, right?
Pardon?
The zonals aren't good for Brighton.
The zonals are it was very good for the right. Good for the right.
Oh, were they?
Yeah. good for the right. I'll put it back up on the screen in a bit when we go, because we're doing Brighton later on anyway, aren't we? But then obviously we've got Grealish, McAllister. I suppose we forget Trossard. I'm on the fence about this. Then we've got players like Foden, Havertz, Mbeumo, and Maddison. Now, obviously, we're going quite a long way down before we get to someone like Maddison. But Spurs' fixtures, 83. But clearly, at the end of last season, he was injured, wasn't he? I'm sure he was injured. And obviously, he was in a team which were really struggling. But look at his involvement, 98. Look at his XG and XA added together, 94. That tells me that he also could be one to watch this season. Mark, what's your perspective on Maddison?
Yeah, I think the short answer is he's in my latest draft.
Right.
But I'm slightly conflicted because it does tick my usual game week 1 box of proven FPL asset, but then it's the new manager, new system, moving to a new team. How are Spurs going to settle? But I think their fixtures are pretty decent to begin with as well. I like them for their attackers. So it's, again, this price bracket's difficult. But Maddison, I just think I always think if there was an FPL factory and they're designing ideal players for the game, he is one of the midfielders that is perfectly designed. So many routes to points, good for the bonus. Quite simply, such a good player. And good to see him still as an option in FPL. And yeah, I think there's a good chance I might take the gamble. We'll probably talk about Youngman Son later, but I do like the cash saving. 1.5 goes a long way. You can upgrade 3 positions with that cash saving, and I just think he's going to be very important. No matter what kind of system they use, he's going to be one of the focal points. Can score from distance. He's probably going to take the corners. We know we can do from free kicks. And yeah, just a good player, a proven asset. I quite like the fixtures. So he's my kind of player for game week 1. Nice placeholder. Even if he's not fantastic, he can quickly become someone else on this list. And just on the Mitoma and Mbeumo thing as well, it's probably 2 of the biggest questions I have in my mind. With just under 4 weeks to go to the season. Mitoma's been in both of my drafts, but I'm asking myself, am I putting too much weight on the good memories I've had with him last season, and not enough weight on what he did towards the end of the season? I think I captained him in a double game week, and he did very well for me. So I think that's leading into my thinking. I think Nima, we might have been together for that one, where we did have
I think we had a shot to celebrate. One. Yeah, Adam as well.
Again,
we have very fond memories of Mitoma.
Well, I need to remember when I'm finalising my Game Week 1 team and when I'm not sure to do with Mitoma, I'm not going to contact Nima for his opinion because
no, please don't. It goes wrong.
I'll send you a selfie of me in a Japan national team jersey.
God. Yeah, I'm also not going to contact. I'm also not going to contact Chris because I'll end up with Solly March. So I think Gabe, I'll be coming to you for my.
Yeah, Gabe will warn you away from Solly March as much as possible. I'm sure. How do you put it?
Gabe will have we'll replace both with Mbeumo in the team. So that was it. But my first question I'm asking myself, am I having too much faith in Mitoma? So I really want to question that position in my team. And the second one is Mbeumo. I'm really conflicted on Mbeumo because, again, I'm putting too much weight on when he hit the post every time I owned him, whereas I'm not probably putting enough weight on how good he was towards the end of last season. So I'm very conflicted. I don't really want to pick Mbeumo because he's not my kind of FPL pick. My gut instinct when the game came out was I'm not really that interested. So I really don't want to pick him just because I see him in a lot of other teams. So the Mitoma and Mbeumo spot in my team, I think I'll probably end up with just one 6.5 option and maybe even none if I can find the cash for maybe a Foden. If he starts Community Shield, if he's looking good preseason, maybe I'll just avoid these 6.5s altogether and let it play out for a couple of weeks. So I'm really struggling with that part of the midfield.
I think that jump, it's just 1 million, right? And you can get to Foden, you can get to Havertz, you can get to Grealish. Like you can get to, it's quite a big jump for that 1 million. That's what has me kind of leaning towards finding that extra cash to move off of the 6.5 price point.
Yeah. The more I think about it, the more I think I like a gamble on Foden more than Mitoma, who I'm not sure about, and Mbeumo, who I'm definitely not sure about. So maybe there is an opportunity with that one midfield spot to take your gamble. You're spending more cash. You can obviously quite easily drop down to one of those guys when we've got a bit more info.
Yeah, it's always better to have that. That's one reason why I've had Jesus in my drafts for quite a long time, is so that I can get, I'm looking at 8 and I think, right, okay, I can look at that 7.5 slot and decide which one I want in weeks to come. So again, I think it's a very good lesson that, always, if you start in that little bit higher, you can always drop down. It's much easier to drop down than go up, isn't it? So yeah, I think that's probably a wise man speaking on our show. It's rather strange. We don't normally have much wisdom on our show, Mark. Well, certainly not from me anyway. Maybe from Gabe. I think Gabe's probably a bit of wisdom. Neiman's a bit all over the place, but
just on one segment. That's it. That's where I drop my wisdom. All that.
So anyway, we'll keep. Let's keep going, because I think what I'm going to do eventually is I'm going to put them all together. So let's go now to 8 to 12.5. And of course, it's very difficult when you are trying to compare value for players who are just priced so wide apart, for example. But one thing we will do, so I thought the first thing to do is take the value out completely again and do it from the perspective of the on-field stats. And Fernandes at 8.5 million sits above Salah for XA. Bonus points, he absolutely blitzes him out the water. And I mean, blitzes everybody out the water in this price range. Goals, then for involvement and also big chances created, he also is above Salah. Salah sits there quite happily in about second spot, but, shots in the box is top, assists is top. But, for 12.5 million, I immediately look at this, and Salah's just in the middle of this gang, just in the middle of this group. And I was expecting, if I'm paying 12.5 million, I'm expecting to see him standing out, or I was hoping to see him standing out. And clearly I expected he wouldn't anyway, but he's not. And in fact, the players who are, shall we say, sitting at the top of these metrics, pretty much a clean sweep for Manchester United. Fernandes, minutes, XA, baseline bonus points, involvement and big chances created. Rashford, expected points, XG, goals, big chances and shots on target. But then you've got Jota getting into the mix, actually equal on goals there. But then you go a bit further down and you've got Saka, who I remember owning at the end of last season, and his form was, shall we say, not that good. Son obviously was injured, had basically, plenty of involvement, but not that much. And now he's cheaper, but even then, his numbers are still not great. Odegaard sat around there, but the player who sat just under Salah, who's interesting, is 8 million, is Martinelli. So first things for Mark, I'm going to come to you on this one. I mean, you're a Manchester United fan. Have you got Bruno and Rashford in your drafts? Are you going all in? Did you say you were?
Yeah, I think it's very likely that I'll end up on a triple up. Fixture's number one, but I think I like a lot of the prices as well. And again, it just drills it home for me seeing these Bruno Fernandes numbers. I think in more recent years I've come to love bonus points, magnets, and Bruno obviously ticks that box. He can get 1 assist and he can get 2 or 3 bonus depending on how the game goes. So yeah, I think my latest draft has Bruno, but I think my third draft will have Rashford and Bruno. And I think that will become more and more popular as we get closer to the season. When people watch things like this, when they see these numbers for Bruno, we know what Rashford can do in terms of goals. I think a lot of people will come to this scenario where they just can't decide which one they want, and they'll just say, sod it, I'll just get both, and then I'll jump off one of them, maybe when the fixtures get a bit more difficult. So I think there's a very, very good chance I'll end up on Bruno and Rashford because, again, I think Bruno was the first price reveal with Odegaard, and I think that's part of the reason a lot of us were like, wow, 8.5, that is a ridiculously cheap price. But then when you see the other prices, I still think it's really, really cheap. I think that could just be a mistake. It could prove to be a mistake. If he can have a big season, he's going to, obliterate that 8.5 price tag. So Bruno, Rashford, good to see their numbers here. It just kind of reinforces it for me that I really like both picks. I'll quite happily settle for just one if I can't make it work. But I do like the idea of the double up But I do think that probably will become quite popular as we get closer to the season, especially if both of them start, doing a few bets in pre-season. Martinelli's probably the one that catches my eye here because I hadn't really given too much thought. I'm very much a Saka man. I had good times with Odegaard last season as well. Again, I probably am a little bit too fearful of rotation for Martinelli because, it didn't really happen much last season. I think I fall into the trap, and I think a lot of us fall into the trap nowadays of being a little bit too cautious in terms of minutes. Isak versus Wilson is the famous one. But I think Martinelli is a good example of this as well. A manager like me who's safe and boring will always gravitate towards Saka or Odegaard for minutes. But that, as we've seen for large parts of last season, that doesn't mean they're going to get the most points. So I want to try and remind myself of that and be maybe a little bit braver with picks like Martinelli because, the numbers speak for themselves here.
Yeah. Well, I'm just to let you know, I'm currently on Saka and Martinelli and Rashford and Bruno. At this moment, I'm on both. That's my who's my fifth mid at the moment? I can't quite remember. I think it
Casemiro.
No, it's not. No, it's definitely
That's
not.
why he was asking your opinion as a United.
And it's not. Actually, it's Solly March. Well, actually, it's not because I've got Ferguson up front. It might be Solly March, but at the moment I've got Ferguson in there. But yeah, great. Let's keep going because I'm mindful of time because I want to just bring the value into this, and of course that drops Salah out the window, quite frankly. But we knew it would do that anyway. But the player who's it's propelled to the top now is Rashford, then Martinelli, then Fernandes, then Saka. So if we're talking about Arsenal from the perspective of value, Nima, just value at this moment in time, Martinelli, then Saka, then Odegaard. From a value perspective, what does that tell you? Does that resonate?
I think that's fair. I do think with Martinelli, I think people are going to be surprised next year. He's definitely been one of my favorite players since he signed when he was just 18 years old, and he was meant to kind of go on loan. And in the preseason, he showed so much that he stayed with the squad. I think, genuinely speaking, last year before his injury, he was on the joint most non-penalty, or I think not non-penalty. Sorry, he was on the joint most goals in any Premier League season from a Brazilian player. So had he not got injured, I think he would have broken the record for most goals ever by a Brazilian in the Premier League in one season. And I think next year he's just got so much more to show and grow. So I really would like him as a second mid. But what I will say is Saka's been in from the beginning. He's not going anywhere. I think one of the stats I spoke about last season about Bukayo Saka is that nearly every kind of goal he scored or assisted was the goal that either put Arsenal ahead in a match or leveled it to a draw. So he was kind of the one called upon on that right wing to create all the chances and be the man when we needed to get a game by the scruff of the neck. So I still think Saka, if you kind of, subscribe to this whole talisman theory idea and with the penalties as well, I think he's the man to own. So the question is, do you then double up on the attack? A lot of people have Jesus in their draft. Do they have space for Martinelli or Odegaard as a third? Maybe Havertz as an outside punt, as we mentioned. Or are they going to use that third spot for a defender? So I don't know about you, Mark, whether you have kind of, I guess, free Arsenal players, like whether you have like a striker, a midfielder, and a defender, or whether you would consider triple attack on Arsenal.
Yeah, I think my latest draft does have triple Arsenal. Again, I'm all about the fixtures to begin with, and Arsenal's fixtures are good, and they're obviously one of the best teams in the league. I've kind of naturally gone for one pick in each position, so defender, midfielder, forward. Chris mentioned earlier that he likes Jesus in that second striker spot. I presume he's got Haaland in his first spot.
Yes.
So
yeah.
I think my first draft had Nkunku, but my second draft has Gabriel Jesus. And again, it's just that whole thing of buy the more expensive one and go to Nkunku easily if you need to after a couple of game weeks. Buy yourself a bit of time. And I mean, if you think back to game week 1 last season, we were all amazed by Gabriel Jesus' price. His ownership was ridiculous. It was about 70-80%. So why is it not extremely high again this season? So maybe he's been slightly overlooked by some. I know his season was hugely interrupted and we had Nketiah for a while and maybe there's a few more options at Arsenal, but I've always been a big Jesus fan. and I still really like that price point. So for that reason, I think I slightly favour him over Ollie Watkins, which I'm sure I'm looking forward to talking about next week. So Jesus is in. Saka's probably the second name on my team sheet after Haaland. Trent's quite close as well in the top three. But again, he played a massive part in my season last year, climbing back the rankings. Always been a fan, love a penalty taker, and just rate him extremely highly as a player. One of my favorite players to watch. I just think he's incredible, and I think he can just get better and better. So I think Saka, Jesus, and then again, talking about underpriced players, Gabriel, and maybe even Zinchenko. I just think the prices there are very, very hard to turn down. And for that reason, it's probably one from each position. So double attack with Saka, Jesus. And again, the reason why I don't have Saka Odegaard or Saka Martinelli is you've got Bruno, you've got Rashford, you've got loads and loads of midfielders. And I don't love too many strikers. And that's why Jesus is in there at the moment.
Would you be open to, let's say you did decide after a few weeks Jesus was just a short-term fling and you did downgrade him, would that then open up the opportunity to maybe decide which Arsenal midfielder could be that right second one? So you could kind of save a transfer in game week 2 if all goes well, and then come game week 3, game week 4, you could be looking like a Jesus to Nkunku type of move, or to anyone else, Mitrovic, Watkins as you mentioned, and then essentially upgrade someone like a Mbeumo or a Mitoma if they didn't quite kind of deliver the goods. Then you hopefully know more about how Arsenal are lining up at this stage and which midfielder could be the right second pick. Because I think long term, I still don't see Jesus necessarily as like the striker that's going to get like 20 Premier League goals. And I think with the extra points, obviously, for the clean sheet and the goal in midfield, I think long term, I could see myself moving to that second midfielder, but probably not starting with them.
Yeah, I can see a scenario straight away in my mind where I start with Jesus, I start with Maddison, give it a couple of weeks, Nkunku comes in for Jesus, and Maddison goes to Martinelli. That kind of scenario. If Maddison doesn't hit the ground running, the Spurs are not too hot, and Nkunku is, a very simple, like you say, banking a transfer if I can is something I always try and do in game week 2, just to give yourself that flexibility, make those kind of very attractive double moves. Game week 3, game week 4, when we've got a lot more info. So absolutely open to double Arsenal midfield, and I'm sure at some point I will have it. Had it for large parts of last season. I don't think I ever went as far as triple midfield, but it was certainly viable at times. Because you got to remember, FPL wise they are midfielders, but you're very much getting forwards, with the likes of Martinelli and stuff. So yeah, very open to, and I think Jesus probably will be a short term fling, because if you're going 3-5-2, which I think is likely, and if Haaland's one of them, you're not going to have the same second striker for a long period. You're probably going to jump around. So yeah, Jesus, might stay there. But then Nkunku, even like a Mitrovic, if Mitrovic starts scoring goals, I think we'll all quickly just go back there, even though a lot of us maybe feel he's a little bit overpriced. But if he's doing the business, we'll probably go there.
I think just going to end the poll, but the poll was how many 8 million to 12.5 million midfielders are you going to have? So we have 5% of votes were for one midfielder in that price bracket, 36% for 2, and 41% for 3, 18% for 4. So Val in the chat has 8 to 8.5 million midfielders, for example, if you kind of exclude Salah out of that bracket, I suppose. So it's interesting because 41% voting for 3 midfielders over 8 million. I don't know if I would have expected that, but there is that kind of island between Son and Salah, and there's only really 3 or 4 players above 10 million this year, which is a bit wild. There's no one in that 3 million bracket. So after Haaland and Jesus, every other forward falls under 9. So I like this idea of starting with Jesus, and I do think people underestimate his abilities because he kind of historically underperforms XG. But the thing is, like when you look at his heat maps, he still gets like more touches in the box than pretty much most players across every position in FPL.
You're going to bring up touches in the box.
You say shots in the box. You don't like
God,
that,
don't do
or is it touches in the box? I brought it up specifically to see him. I was trying to trigger him. I was trying to trigger you. Yeah, I will admit I was fishing. I
just stepped on. You just stepped on a line. You just stepped on a landmine, Nima.
I was waiting for him.
You stepped on an axe that I left on the road there.
Hashtag stay sharp.
Stay sharp. Touches in the box are absolutely.
Can I ask Gabe? So Gabe, just the only reason I said that is because I think a lot of people think Jesus drops deep from a tactical point of view. And I think they therefore underestimate that he is still involved in the attack. So that was only the real picture I was painting.
Sense.
I don't think I would use those same stats for most other players, but there was a logic to the madness, I will say.
No, and that makes sense. He drops, but still in the box. Absolutely, and then that's an important point. I wonder if I'm gonna throw that poll just here in conversation, Nima. I feel like we went past a certain group of midfielders that I'm quite interested in, and it's the 7.5 million group. And Foden, Maddison, Grealish, Havertz, and Luis Diaz. Those five, I think are. Everybody is talking about Foden and Maddison, and you can see why. But I think the zonals line up for Grealish quite heavily on the left side rather than the right side for Manchester City in the first five. And then I think Havertz is being kind of like, we don't know what to expect, but Havertz is going to be making his far post runs. He's going to be fading that, flaring out to that far post where he can win headers. He's good at that. And I think Luis Diaz is just painfully overlooked. I think he's the best left winger they have. He'll bring chaos to that team, which is what they need. He's unbelievable with the counter press. He's got a motor on him. So I wonder how people rank, I guess, those five.
So I can only put four, responses. So I've put Diaz, Foden, Maddison, Grealish.
Yeah.
Who was the fifth?
Yeah, those are fine. Use those four. That's better than Havertz. I think Havertz is we can all agree, is kind of a wait and see.
It's a wait and see, I think, with him. Okay, I'll put the new poll out. Cool. All right. So I guess Chris has now put 1 out of 35, the midfielders overall. So we are getting towards the end of these slides, and then we will obviously go to the Q&A. We've started some questions in the chat already, so we will come back to those guys. But let's talk through the midfielders overall. And I know you want to chat a little bit about Brighton as well in general.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I just wanted to summarize where we were. And I think when Gabe was talking about the 7.5, so I thought I'd put it back up on the screen there. And of course, this is the important point, is certain players are not there because of minutes and also the fact that they're possibly new into the league. So we have to just take it with a pinch of salt. But from the perspective of overall, if we're looking at value, and this is basically about value, it's not necessarily, again, we're just talking about value here. March actually tops it. He's above Rashford. He's above Martinelli, then Mitoma, then Grealish, Fernandes, Saka, McAllister, okay, Trossard, ignore. Foden's there as well. Havertz, Brian Bruno, Odegaard. Casemiro's sat there at the bottom and Maddison right at the bottom. But I think, to be honest, again, there are so many caveats about this, realistically. I think what it does here is it just goes back to what we said at the outset, Mark. I think what it does is it pretty much cements the template, unfortunately. It's just showing the same players are sat there. Obviously March, maybe not. But, at the end of the day, you're talking probably a Brighton asset, no doubt, I would say probably. You've players like, obviously, you've got your Rashfords and your Brunos. You've got your Martinellis and your Sakas. You've got Grealish. You've got Foden, players like that. And I think we're going to be picking from 8 or 10 players, actually. I think when we come down to it, I think we'll be picking from 8 or 10. I don't know what your perspective is.
Yeah, it's we're all kind of going to be just quite naturally pushed towards 8, 9, 10, because quite a few of these, if I run through this list in my head, basically there's some that have question marks and some that don't. So you've got your Rashfords, your Brunos, your Brighton midfielder, Saka, no issues whatsoever, just safe, steady. I think I know what I'm going to get. Fixtures are good, easy pick. Worry about the others later, basically. And then you've got the others, Maddison, new club, Havertz, new club, Foden, Pep Guardiola is his manager. How many minutes he's going to get? McAllister, new club, Trossard, rotation. So the game almost picks the players for us. It's kind of puts them into a funnel. A few of them get funneled to one side who've got question marks, new teams, new managers. We don't know. We don't know what we don't know. So we'll give those guys time, which is a safe way to start a season. Unless you're a really brave manager and you want to use the opportunity to be different to begin with when you've got plenty of time to recover if it doesn't work out. But yeah, it's like you say, I think I said at the start of the podcast, there's loads and loads of midfielders to choose from. But realistically, there probably is 8 or 9 that we're all going to be kind of deciding which 5 we go for.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. And I mean, again, we'll put it on the screen because I think what we want to do is get to the questions. But just before I get to the questions, Gabe, there's a couple just of things I want to just bring up. First of all, I want to look at Brighton very quickly. I want to talk about the assets that we've not spoken about yet. And what we always do in this is we always have a sneak peek about what's coming next week, don't we? So what we're going to do is I'm just going to put the Brighton slide up on the screen there for your Seagull selection. And, hopefully they're not going to steal your fish and chips or, worse still, shit on them, because that's what normally happens when I have my fish and chips. But, when we talk about the selection of a Brighton asset, again, like I said, March was top of everything, so he's there. Mitoma is second, but then there we go. Enciso sat there. And of course, we're going to talk about Gross in a minute. There's a caveat, big caveat about Gross. But Enciso sat there. Minutes are down, very cheap, 5.5 million, points 96, XI per million, 100. Absolutely tops the lot. Tops everybody. But is he going to get the minutes? Is he too much of a gamble? I've seen him in no end of drafts, actually. He seems to be a popular pick, but is he too much of a gamble, Gabe? The next one directly below him, and in fact on the same value, is Ferguson. And there we go, 6 million. Okay. I'm not sure if you're aware, Mark, but I'm a big Grimsby fan, and Grimsby got hammered by Brighton in the quarterfinal of the FA Cup. And Ferguson scored Bergkamp-esque goal, quite frankly. It's one of the best goals I've seen scored for a long, long time. That guy is class, and he scored another cracker, I think, last night. So, I mean, from that side of things, Enciso is there. Ferguson is there as a 6 million striker. And of course, we've got other players, Estupiñán, who I think we've all got, and players like Gross. So, if we're looking away, the question I've got for you guys is, if we're looking away from the Mitomas of this world and Estupiñán, I think most of us will have a good chance we could have those players, right? Where do we go if we wanted to go with the third one? They're playing Luton. In the first game. Is that a some people may be looking at trebling up. If you were, or if you fancy a cheaper asset, which one would you go for? Gabe, should I start with you? Because I think you've probably got a perspective on this.
Yeah, Brighton is super interesting, and we do have a lot to learn from them. As Mark says, we don't know what we don't know. One thing that'll do is dispel the zonals. It's 2 extra chances over the central matchup over 5 games. It's less than an extra half chance a game. So I think the zonals are negligible in this case. And I mean, I would imagine that March gets his spot back. I think his chance creation, his big chance creation, I think they missed that. Now that was part of the reason why maybe Brighton got tired towards the end of the season. It's because they had to run around looking for chances that were once supplied by March. But here, what I'll say is, like, we don't know who's going to play the 10. I think that's, and we don't even know who's going to play the 6s, right? Who's going to be there. So we need to figure out what the spine of this team is going to be. And we don't know that yet. I mean, Enciso could play the 10, but Enciso turned 19 in January. Like, he's a Paraguayan, just a teenager, just learning this complicated system. I think it's more likely that, at least to start the season, that a veteran, like maybe Gross, if he's not in playing the 6, or even what's his name, João Pedro, playing the 10 and playing it a little bit further forward and giving room for one of those 6s, maybe for Gross to step into the 10 from the 6 spot if João Pedro plays more, closer to Ferguson. There's value here, but I also feel like when I'm looking at this kind of like more budget price zone for mids, I just feel like I'm missing out on something. Like, I'm missing out on the 7.5s, the 8 millions, and I always have this kind of like just this intuition to get a little more money and move up in price for all of these, unless one pops, and if so, then you can always move back down, as you guys have said so many times in the show already. So
I mean, you make a good point because, I mean, you know, if, for example, I wanted someone, I really like the look of Ferguson, but if I was going to be, it wouldn't be my second striker, it would be my third. Then, of course, then that creates me a problem in midfield because there's all these midfielders, and then I've either got myself a benching headache or I've got a, you know, or potentially I've got a bit of an issue with respect to my fifth midfielder. So I think I'd absolutely love to have Ferguson, but if I was to have him, I would probably go with someone like Sade from Brentford as my fifth midfielder, possibly. But again, does that then take away all these wonderful midfield assets? I think this is the thing, isn't it? There's just so many midfield assets, Mark. For you, have you contemplated Enciso? I bet you haven't, because I don't think he's your sort of player.
No, you're right. I put a 40-player watch list together just a few days ago for Game Week 1. Ferguson was not on it, and Enciso wasn't on it either. And it's just kind of echoed, you know, what Gabe said. You know, these guys are kids. They're extremely young. There's loads of options for De Zerbi. They've also got European competition to worry about this season, which is surely just going to increase rotation. So... yeah, for me, that's why I've naturally gravitated towards Mitoma and Estupinan when I've been looking at Brighton so far. I think coming away from this podcast, I've got a lot more love for Solly March. It's just kind of reminded me how good he was last year, and maybe I need to, you know, give that a bit more thought. But again, when I think about Solly March, there's probably just zero chance he'll be on my Game Week 1 team because of all the other options at other teams. And I feel like when I get closer to Game Week 1 as well, I feel like, you know, Mitoma has been in my first two, but I feel like he's going to drop out of my next couple of drafts, and I'll see what I can do with that spot. Can I turn it into a Foden somehow and take a gamble there instead? And your example, Chris, about, you know, maybe changing your team structure for a Ferguson. I just think going for a Ferguson as a third striker and a Shada, it just sounds weaker, doesn't it? It feels like you're getting two question mark players. Whether if you've got a 3-5-2 formation, it can sound a lot more solid. So I don't think too many people will go for like a 6 million striker and a 5.5 midfielder when you can just get a fifth midfielder who's pretty decent, even if it is Mitoma and Bumo, and just stick with your 4.5 forward. So structure wise, the game to me is very much geared towards 3-5-2 to begin with. I'm going to explore a couple of 4-4-2s, but at the moment I think it's most likely going to be 3-5-2.
Yeah, I think I'm on 3-5-2 right now. I have sort of, like I said, I have tinkered with that Ferguson in that third striker spot, but I always come back to that argument that I just feel like I'm starting to tear me structure to bits. And, you know, as I say, you know, at the moment I've got those double Manchester United and double Arsenal. I may not end up with double Arsenal. I think it may well be a Foden, may well take one of those spots, but ultimately, I just look at that value across there. I mean, you know, this has all been about value, and we're just coming to the end of that now. So I think what we'll do is we'll take the questions, but no, I think hopefully, Mark, it's given you a bit of an insight into what we do here, and yeah, I know we're very data heavy, and just to give you the background as to why I'm such a data heavy player is because where I've been living in the world for the last 6, 7, 8 years, I hardly been watching games because it's the middle of the night for me. So I tend to look at data. That's the background why I'm so data heavy. And Gabe's
I know I'd be exactly the same if I didn't work in FPL full time, and if I didn't have time to watch games, I'd be leaning a lot heavier on the data. You know, I respect the data. I could see why people use it. But I've just got the luxury that I do get to watch games, and I find, going back to the chart earlier, you know, balance and have fun. To me, the most fun way is watching a game, picking out a player and just going for it. You know, yeah, the stats might not back it up. It might not be the most optimal way to play the game, but it's always been the way I've played it since I've been 12, 13 years old when I started playing FPL. So I kind of like keeping that part of the game. I don't want to go down a route where I have all my decisions made for me, because again, I think that you lose the fun in that way. So yeah, hopefully I can continue to watch games and play it my way, which I think is the most important thing.
Yeah, I think just before we go to the new assets who obviously don't appear in the metrics we looked at due to lack of data for the second half of last season, I'm going to end the poll, Gabe. And the poll, Foden won with 77% for the 7.5 million midfielder of choice. Foden 77%, Diaz 18%, Maddison 4%, Grealish 0%. This might be interesting come around the end of the season when things change. But let's quickly look at the new assets in midfield. We'll do your philosophy as well, Gabe, and then I've got lots of questions saved.
Well, this was super quick, but I think let's really rattle through this. Gabe, I've selected 4 teams there with new assets. So we've got McAllister and, oh God, do I have to say this? Was it Szoboszlai?
Pretend they're S's.
Szoboszlai, okay. Sandro Tonali at Newcastle, obviously Mason Mount at Manchester United. And we've got James Maddison, of course, we've spoken about, Mana Solomon at Spurs. I've not put any more in. But Gabe, very, very quickly, because I'm mindful of time here, but Szoboszlai, probably an interesting one, I think.
Yeah, I'll do like Liverpool, Newcastle, and then maybe Mark can do United since he's a fan, and then maybe Mark, if you would do Spurs as well since you're a Celtic fan.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so Liverpool, I mean, McAllister and Szoboszlai, everybody's putting McAllister at left center midfield, Szoboszlai on the right center midfield. I'm not so sure about that. If Szoboszlai goes on right center midfield, then you have Salah coming into Szoboszlai, and you have Trent inverting into that same side as well. And if you have Salah coming into Szoboszlai's space, then Szoboszlai needs to fan out on the right wing. And if Szoboszlai fans out on the right wing, then Liverpool can't counter press effectively because they just lost a central midfielder. So I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work. I think it actually makes more sense for McAllister to shore up the right center midfield spot with the way he's able to track the play and cover defensively, certainly on the counter press, and Szoboszlai to actually play on the left. This is just me thinking about kind of what makes sense. So just keep an eye on how Liverpool play. Szoboszlai's used to playing the right center midfield spot in a 4-2-2-2. If Liverpool do end up lining up in a 4-2-2-2, that means Darwin Núñez gets in and Luis Diaz gets dropped because Luis Diaz is a wider player. So all of a sudden, Jurgen Klopp has several things that he can do, but I think one of the most important things for him is going to be plugging the gaps in central midfield when they're in possession, because their counter press has not been the same for a couple of seasons. So just watch it for their positioning. Szoboszlai obviously much more attacking than McAllister. Really quickly on Newcastle, Sandro Tonali, excellent number 6, but also a young player. He could release Bruno Guimaraes a little bit more, but I have a feeling that Bruno and that Guimaraes and Tonali are gonna kind of sit there and let the front players do their thing a little bit. It could potentially release Trippier even more towards the end of the season. I know Trippier was held back a little bit. I felt as well at the beginning of the season a little bit, as well as Almiron went into that space, but then later Joe Ellington kept going into that right wing spot, and that would hold Trippier back. So that shoring up the central areas defensively for Newcastle could increase Trippier's role in possession. So just these are just things to keep an eye out in preseason. We'll see how they shake out. Over to you, Mark.
I'll keep this brief as well. I know we're keen to get to the question section. On Mason Mount, first of all, I know a lot of Manchester United fans were kind of, some people were hot, some people were cold on the signing. I've always liked him as a player, so I think a good addition to the squad. FPL wise, I'm hopeful that he'll have a positive impact on Bruno. Hopefully, it'll just allow Bruno to have a bit more freedom, and I think overall he should just make the attack, a little bit better, which can only be a good thing FPL wise for the likes of Bruno and Rashford. And with Mount as well, hopefully he himself, I think it would be good for FPL if he could start the season well with some attacking returns, just to give us another option in that midfield for a little bit cheaper than the others. On to the Tottenham guys. Watched a lot of Celtic as a season ticket holder last season. I think it is quite difficult though to I think it's dangerous as well to kind of predict what a new manager is going to do from their previous team, because I think good managers will set up with the players that they have. You might not necessarily have the players to play the exact same system. On Maddison, we know what we get from him. He's a proven asset. We know what he does. I think he'll play a similar position at Tottenham than he did at Leicester. So I still think he'll be a really, really good FPL prospect. Manor Solomon, some absolute bangers from the wing at Fulham last season. I was a little bit surprised to see him go to Tottenham, to be honest, but I do rate him quite highly as a player. And thinking back to the Celtic games last season, you know, the wingers were incredible. Jota in particular, he's gone to Saudi now, unfortunately. But it really, my first couple of games watching Postecoglou, the wingers stood out to me. You know, how he really likes to isolate them 1v1 against a defender. So I think that'll play into Solomon's hands. But when he's on the pitch, that is obviously because he's got, you know, Heung-min Son and stuff there. So yeah, really excited to see Tottenham under Postecoglou. I rate him extremely highly. I think the Spurs fans are going to love him. And I'm hopeful that that will be good for the FPL prospects as well.
Brilliant.
Right.
Cool. So I think we'll quickly go to the FPL Philosophy for the third preseason episode from you, Gabe, from Emmanuel Kant this week.
Yes, Emmanuel Kant. Some German, don't worry.
Is he?
He said, he said, science is organized knowledge. Wisdom is organized life. And the reason I chose this quote for this week, and I'll make this quick as well, I know we're hitting 2 hours close here, is because of the chart that we looked at earlier. We saw like how you can get too complex and you can make life too complicated. Don't lose that fun, that happy place. If you stray from the happy place, it doesn't matter how like smart you are or how many things you know. You've strayed from the happy place, so you're lost. So just, you know, organize life as a whole. Be holistic in your approach, and don't be myopic, I guess.
I like that.
Your
Cool
happy
stuff.
place, our happy place. My happy place is getting to the questions and going to bed because it's midnight.
Now you know how I felt all the last season.
Hey, speak for yourself. I used to have to get up at bloody 5 o'clock in the morning. At least it's not quite so bad now.
That's true. So quickly, plug for the mini league. If you're on podcast, the code is HUP69D. Anyone who's a Patreon or a YouTube member, we're also going to do a separate prize league for you guys with monthly prizes and a top 3 kind of reward at the end, as well as a cup winner award. So there's actually 1 hour 56 in. It's the first time I'm going to say it. If you've enjoyed the show, if you appreciate Mark taking his time to be here with us today, if we've made you smile or laugh, please hit that like button and subscribe if you're new to the channel. I have promised a return of the allergy costume at 2,500 subs. And last I checked, we were at 3 away from that. So maybe by the next time you see me, I will be fully donned in the allergy tracksuit. But yeah, I think a quick thank you as well for the haulers who've supported us thus far as I start to get the questions up on screen. So we have our super haulers, Harbour Boy, Daddy Bot, Greenback Golf, and FPL Robbie. We have our Patreons, Elron, Lucy and Gan, and FPL California. We have our haulers, Dread FPL, FPL Craig, Podner, Mike Halpin, Donny, Oscar Arias, FPL Teacher, Blonde, S. Scott M, Tom Garush, Devindra Raj, Lindsay, C. Hunt, Akshay, FPL DG Boy, Claire FPL, Dom, Catherine, William, Harry Not Kane, Neil, Sebastian Koo, Benjamin Lockwood, Tursks, Nils Apples, Jasper and Singh, Nick Khan, FPL Rubber Ducky is back, Big Mike, Kevin Rose, General Zod, Salah the Samurai, FPL Blue Footed Booby, and our newest hauler who signed up just before the show went live, Reese Hughes Jones. So thank you so much. And obviously Zach from earlier, but I won't press the button that wakes up Mariner's family with the very loud noise. It's been a pleasure to have you here, Mark. Before we do the Q&A, I just want to ask everyone where they can find you. If they've been living under a rock all this time, how can they get in contact?
Yeah, do you know what? It's always nice to pick up a few new followers at this time of the season. I always love chatting to people who are playing for the first time. Usually I just say, don't play, don't get involved. You know, get out before you get in, because once you're in, you're not going to get back out again. But yeah, on Twitter at FPL General is the best place to find me, and the 59th Minute FPL podcast twice weekly during the season. So yeah, check those out.
Definitely hit those up. As Gabe mentioned, I think we've both been long-time listeners and big fans, and it was honestly a true pleasure and honor to host that meets with you and Veteran and Adam from Above Average. Obviously, it was in Glasgow last time. No, sorry, it was in Edinburgh. But we're going to come to your home turf of Glasgow next time. So if you're a Scottish FPL manager, you want to meet up and watch some of the football next season, do get in touch with me as well on FPL Meets, and we will look to get a date in the diary. We've started some questions throughout the show. We're going to do quick fire here. so that you can get out of here. I did say 2 hours. I didn't think it would get this long, but we're only just arriving at the Q&A. So do let us know if you need to leave. We understand. Family takes priority. But until then, the first question from the YouTube chat is from FPL Teacher. What rate of returns would it take for you guys to take a 6.5 million midfielder that isn't Mitoma and to essentially take them seriously? So what is it that's going to make any of you, I guess we'll go to you, Mark, directly. What are you looking for from a 6.5 million under midfielder before you're willing to take them seriously, excluding Mitoma?
Yeah, I think you've got to remember, if it is a 6.5 million midfielder, that your expectations shouldn't be very high. You are only spending 6.5 on that position, so you don't expect fireworks. You're not going to get a incredible asset for 6.5. Sometimes we do. Last season maybe we did with some of the Arsenal guys and stuff like that. But if you are going for a 6.5 that's not Mitoma, maybe an Mbumo or something like that, someone who just ticks along nicely. They don't need to get an attack and return every game week. If they're chipping in with the odd assist, the odd goal, even 2 or 3 goals or 2 or 3 attack returns over 5 game weeks is probably going to be decent. So yeah, I think it's important to remember you're not spending 8.5 on Mitoma or Mbumo, so don't temper your expectations.
That's a fair comment. We have one from Claire FPL. She's only got Trent from Liverpool so far, and she's not sure if she needs to cover the midfield with someone like Luis Diaz, Jota, who we mentioned, and then obviously new signing, who I'm not going to try and pronounce. That's for you, Dominic. Or do you wait until game week 2 versus Bournemouth and see how the Chelsea game pans out, Mark? Are there any Liverpool mids for you in the team?
Trent's my only Liverpool asset at the moment in draft number 2. Gabe mentioned Luis Diaz earlier. I agree. I think he's been maybe one of the most criminally overlooked. But again, there's slight question marks over game time. But I remember very clearly game week 1 last season, I went Robertson and I didn't go Diaz, and it really, really hurt. 20, 30 points easily over 4 or 5 game weeks. So don't ignore Diaz if you are looking, at a Liverpool attacker. But I could have 2 Liverpool players. I could have Trent and Salah. I could have no Liverpool players. I think my next draft might not have Trent just to see what it feels like. So I'm undecided. Claire mentioned waiting until game week 2. I don't like doing that, because if you can save a transfer in game week 2 at all, I think that's a better way to approach it. So if you want a Liverpool asset game week 2, I think get them game week 1.
Yeah. Sounds good. So Rubber Ducky on the Discord YouTube questions channel, he asked about 4 million viable defenders, but we'll cover that in the game week 1 matchup show, I'm sure. He also asks about, he's 50-50 between Luis Diaz and a second Arsenal attacker in Havertz. His plan allows him to get Diaz in game week 4, but should he get the attacking Liverpool cover straight away?
Yeah, do you want me to take that one again?
Yeah. I think I'm just going to send them all your way, to be honest.
No, that's okay. I'm going to sleep.
I asked these other 2 jokers, but we're so over time, I think I'm just going to come straight to you every time.
I'm going to sleep extremely well tonight because my brain's going to be absolute mush.
Frying you, aren't we?
Luis Diaz or Havertz? Honestly, the answer is probably go shopping again and maybe find someone else. I'm not overly enthused by either. I've just got some question marks, especially with Havertz. It's a new team. We don't know how he's going to fit in. Diaz, I would like to think he gets a lot of starts, but can I say 100% he's gonna? I don't think so at this point. So yeah, we've talked up Foden a lot on this episode.
We have, and he got so many votes, didn't he?
Maybe that's the way to go, or maybe a little bit safer Maddison in terms of minutes rather than those 2.
So what do you think about the relegation survivors? Is there anyone who has a chance of kicking on, such as Danilo, Ouattara, or Demirari Gray? So that was, I guess, in the 5.5 million bracket and below. But
yeah, I just don't think we need to. Don't need to shop in those brackets.
We just don't need to, right? Not with the way the pricing has gone down.
It's nice we can skip those kind of questions this season, because we're going to have good players from good teams.
Yeah,
it's a bit of a wasteland, isn't it? It's a bit of a wasteland, that price bracket. We haven't got this at this moment in time. There's no one sat there looking like what Andreas was last year, for example. There's no one sitting and kicking around that at that moment. So, yeah, I think we ignore it for now and just concentrate on those better priced assets.
What was Gandhi's best season rank? I don't think any of us can answer that.
No
So we were
idea.
talking about the Gandhi quote earlier, obviously. So we were wondering, Robert Ducky was wondering what was Gandhi's best rank. I guess
he's obviously had a lot of bad ranks because he obviously did back the early kickoff quite often.
That's right. He keeps captaining that early kickoff, so there's no wonder
he wouldn't
he's
have
never
like
captain, right.
Yeah, he wouldn't have the quote otherwise, would he?
What was on that note? What was your best rank?
Best rank was I think it was 102. Yeah, I don't have a top 100, but 102 is close enough.
Mariner, does that hurt as someone who finished 122nd?
No, it doesn't. No, I still blame.
This might be the first. This might be the first
for it
guest.
anyway. I still blame you, so that's fine.
This might be the first guest.
And I blame
that has
Riyad
a higher...
Mahrez missing that fucking penalty. Sorry, I've lasted 2 hours and 4 minutes till I swore. And the moment I mentioned Mahrez, I swore. Sorry.
I think this might be the first guest or second guest actually who has actually had a higher overall finish than you, Mariner. So we're in very good company here.
As I said, that I went crashing down to earth last year with 97,000 or something like that.
Okay, so we've answered Cleo's question about your highest ever finish. Robert Ducky said, "Are we supposed to be having fun?" I think we all know that.
Of course we are.
That's where we want to be.
I think he was talking about Gabe's philosophy earlier on. That's philosophy slide. I think it blew everyone's mind.
The FPL profiling, yes.
Yeah.
So thank you to Zach again, as we said. Okay, so we have Greenback Golf. Does anyone even consider Kovacic at 5 million as an option for those who are throwing in a cheap mid? So I guess some 3-4-3s out there. Is it worth going up to 5 million instead of getting a 4.5 million fifth mid?
I don't think
his role is right.
Go ahead, Gabe.
I was just gonna say if his role looks promising, then I mean, that right around that time, game week 3, game week 4, there's some fixtures changing. You may want to move somebody like a Spurs asset or something like that. So it's just going to depend on what his role is, right?
Yeah, I think it's a wait and see. Maybe the Community Shield will give us some more info. Matthew Kane asks, does Gibbs White show up well at all here? The Brentford Forest rotation is terrific. I've been looking at a good bench with Mabuemo and Gibbs White rotating. I think Gibbs White is a 6 million mid, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously, he looked the part last season. What are our thoughts here? Is the Forest team more settled now after kind of buying like a truckload of players last year? Are they a bit more settled? Is Gibbs White worthy of a 4th and 5th mid rotation option?
Well, I really like him. I really like him. That what does he say? Brentford Forest, did he say?
As a rotation.
So
but just generally, how is Gibbs White showing up in the data?
So it's home Spurs, home Sheffield United, home Crystal Palace, home Bournemouth, and then home Burnley. It's not bad, Matt. That's not bad, actually. But, I mean, look, Gibbs White is the talisman, clearly, for that team, as far as I'm concerned. But if you looked at Forest on their own, the fixtures are bloody horrible. But would we be taking, is that, again, taking away too much out of that midfield? There are just so many options there. Would you do that rotation? I'm not sure. I can see why he's thinking about it. I don't think it's stupid.
I think we said it last week, right? When we were looking at 4.5 million defender rotation. And it's what Mark said about some of this pricing, right? It doesn't feel like you need to go for the rotation in game week 1 with the way the players from the kind of big 6 clubs have been priced, personally speaking anyway. So Akib asks, with Rice out, will Vlasic play more? I'm sure, correct me if I'm wrong, Gabe, but is Vlasic not firstly, is he still there? And secondly, why?
Does anybody care?
Is anyone going to buy Vlasic? So Akib, I'm sorry, that's a troll. We're going to move on. De Bruyne has entered the chat. So De Bruyne is obviously looks like he's out for the first few game weeks. So I think we'll come back to him when the time comes. Nehal says in the 7 to 7.5 million bracket, Sterling and Dominic for him. Andy says Cole Palmer is close to joining Brighton, apparently. Obviously, you add Joao Pedro into there, eating into people's minutes. Yeah, there are question marks around, Solly March, and you got Boyanetta, you got Enciso. There's a lot of players. March, as Gabe famously said, is a wing-back playing winger. So as much as the spreadsheets might love him, do you love a wing-back playing as an attacker? I don't know if I trust his finishing to kind of improve. What about you, Gabe?
I mean, I like a wing back playing winger, a wing back not named March playing winger.
Look, it's not.
Is that a
Harvey Barnes.
Stupinian?
Look, hang on, we're going to get to Harvey Barnes standard in a minute.
Porro, Trent, any of them. They're okay.
What you'll work out, Mark, is Gabe's got many grudges, right? All the time. There's numerous grudges. He's like an elephant. He never forgets.
Harvey Barnes is one of them. So Matthew Kane says, I personally think, and these are the last 3 questions before we get out of here. So some of them are just statements, but I thought they're worth talking about. So Matthew says, I personally think you'll get more from Salah plus a 6 or 6.5 million that you can rotate fixtures around than Rashford and Bruno together. Hence the value of players like March and Morgan Gibbs-White and Mbuemo, etc. So would you prescribe to the thought, guys? I guess just a quick show of hands. Would you rather have Salah and a 6.5, or would you rather have Bruno and Rashford? We'll start on the top left with you, Gabe. Which one would you go? Mariner?
Bruno Rashford.
I'm guessing it's Bruno and Rashford for you.
Yeah,
I would go the same. I would go the same. Yeah. Like I understand like the sentiment there, but I can go from Bruno or Rashford to one of those 6.5s should it not work out. I hate rotation, especially of goalkeepers. But even like in midfield, there are all the famous hauls of Dallas against Man City, etc., where you bench the player with the worst fixture and they actually haul. So I don't like, it's more defensively with clean sheets that you can't call them as much. But equally, I generally would rather put as little money on my bench and not consider rotation. Val says, my third Brighton asset is Jason Steele in goal. They were top 5 in expected goals conceded and expected goals against, I guess, from last season. I will play aggressive from the get-go. Is anyone considering like a, I guess, Steele as well as a Stupinian? I don't think
it's worth a risk because they have signed a new goalkeeper.
Yeah,
so we can't say 100%. I would like to think Steele keeps his place at least early on in the league, but we just can't say for sure. So when you can get a Pickford or someone who you know is going to play, I just don't think it's worth the risk unless you've got a backup that plays. But again, keep your money on the pitch, I say, rather than having 2 4.5 goalkeepers.
Sounds good. And the final question from Alex Mitchell as we get out of here. Is this MCFC, Alex? Is this the Man City? Okay, I just wanted to double check. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I saw his inspiring story about leading his team through the kind of the nationals and stuff. Yeah, so that was quite exciting. So Alex asks, how do you all, specifically you, Mark, expect United's attacking dynamic to change this season? Is Rashford still the main man talisman?
Yeah, so I think if there's no big striker signed, I do expect Rashford to be the main man again. And that's why at this moment in time, if I could only pick one Manchester United midfielder, I would go Rashford over Bruno if I can find the 0.5. Like I said, I might end up on both. But yeah, with Mount coming in, with no striker yet signed, I don't really expect a massive amount of change. So yeah, we're quite a way away from the season starting yet, so it all depends on future signings. But if there is no signings, yeah, Rashford, I think, is going to be the main man again.
I guess the latest I saw, Mark, was that you were kind of going to bid, I think it was 60 million euros for Holland. Not Haaland, Holland. But I hope I'm pronouncing it right. But yeah, so I guess he
have
would be
a Holland frontline in our FPL teams in.
Yeah, just have Holland. Forget Jesus. So is he what Martial was always promised to be? Is he going to be the stay fit forward at United? And what would they price a new signing at striker at United? Surely he can't be more than 7.5 million.
Yeah, that's a good question, an interesting question. Again, I'm someone who doesn't really watch much other than the Premier League, so I can't tell you anything about Holland or however you pronounce his name. But what interests me more is what price would he be? Because if he does come in and if he becomes a regular starter, like you say, he can't be more expensive than a Jesus or a Watkins. So 7.58, I guess.
Let's keep an eye on him, I think, because if we see him get signed soon in the next couple of weeks and he plays some of those preseason games, I believe my beloved Arsenal are playing you guys over in the States on tour. So he might even be there in the 9 position by then, right? But yeah, apart from that, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you to Mark, especially for joining us. As he mentioned, you can find him on Twitter at FPL General and his podcast a couple of times a week, 59th Minute Pod. I believe you have found a home for the pod this season with Scout, so Fantasy Football Scout. So they're obviously supporting the show. Obviously stay in touch. We'll kind of share this on podcast afterwards. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like, hit that subscribe, and do make sure you follow Mark if you don't already.
You might
otherwise,
1.5.
1.5 speed. Yeah, so 2 hours 14 in. We can only thank you for your service. You have definitely been promoted from deckhand, Mark. That's the main thing I can say here. The next time you come, you'll be riding.
Decided is now Sea Lord.
Sea Lord, okay. Commodore is out the window. Yeah,
no, Sea Lord's even higher than Commodore, right? Sea Lord. Yeah. There we go. FPL Sea Lord.
Yes. So I'm not going to wake up your kids. I promise I won't play that. But I did earlier in the show, if anyone saw the Easter egg, I did play the Solly, not Solly, when March's goal got stolen from him. So that photo still stays with me forever. I'm going to sign us out. It's been a pleasure, guys. And we will see you for the Forwards episode next Sunday. We'll figure out the time. We'll share that on Twitter. But instead of Monday next week, it will be Sunday evening. And the boys will go through the Forwards. And I will then be back from my trip. And I'm going to do an episode with some of our super haulers. So if you are a super hauler, and I think Zach just signed up as one, do get in touch, because I'm looking to do some rate my teams or roast my teams, as we call them at Net That Haul. We give we give very low scores and we just roast you instead of rating them. So if you want to join me and some of the super haulers, and maybe Chris, if you can make it, we will go through the roast my team as well. Thank you, everybody. We will see you next time. We were Net That Haul, with special guest Sea Lord at FPL General. See you next time, guys. Peace.
Bye.